We're good to go, Eric?
Yes, please.
All right, so we'll call to order the November 19th Delta Protection Commission Zoom meeting. And as always, we'll begin the meeting with a flag salute. I believe we've got a flag available to be shared. There we go. All right, so if you'll stand if you can and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. On the count of three, 1, 2, 3, pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic which stands one nation under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you for that, everybody. And so let's see, I've got a little script here as we continue to meet using our latest and greatest technology. So just as a reminder, because of COVID-19, we're continuing to meet today remotely via Zoom. However, the public can join us by telephone by calling the 1-888 number 4734 and entering the code 388754. The information is located at the top of the meeting agenda. And if you're interested, you can find meeting materials located at www.delta.ca.gov. And so we're asking all commission members, as you'll recall, to minimize background noise. Please mute yourself unless you're speaking. And when you do decide to speak, make sure you identify yourself for the order. If you're interested in providing public comment, please use the raise hand feature. If you're joining by telephone, press #2 to indicate you would like to make a public comment. And if you press #2 again, you will remove your raised hand. So that #2 will be important for you. Please wait to be recognized by the chair so we can maintain an orderly discourse. So with that, I believe Commission Clerk Sis Hendricks is present this evening with us. And so if you will please call the roll.
Thank you. Chair Villegas.
Present, sorry.
Vice Chair Natoli.
Here.
Commissioner Wynn.
Here.
Commissioner Burgess.
Here.
Commissioner Thompson.
Present.
Commissioner Craig.
Present.
Commissioner Sandine.
Here.
Commissioner Nakanishi.
Here.
Commissioner Paroli. Repeating Commissioner Paroli. Commissioner Slater.
Here.
Commissioner Musi. Repeating Commissioner Musi. Commissioner Agar.
Here.
Commissioner Lester Moffitt.
Here.
Commissioner Vogel. Repeating Commissioner Vogel.
I'm here.
Thank you. Commissioner Bush.
Here.
Assembly Member Frazier.
Here.
Senator Galgiani.
And
we have a quorum established. I'm sorry.
no, I'm sorry. This is Erik Vink. I do know Jim Paroli is on the meeting. I don't know if he can unmute himself, but
I thought I saw him.
we did add him to the meeting.
Okay, let me do a count. Chair Villegas, we have a quorum established with 14 commissioners present.
Wonderful, Madam Clerk. Thank you for that very much. So we're good to go. We're going to go ahead and begin with public comment. And this is typically an opportunity for the public to comment on items that are not on the agenda formally, but certainly within the jurisdiction and the subject matter of the commission. So I believe we do have some public testimony this evening, Madam Clerk. Is that correct?
Natasha, I'm going to deflect to you.
Nobody submitted a written comment by the noon period. At this time, I do not see any chats.
Okay.
There is a hand raised.
Yeah, yeah. All right. So Commissioner Burgess, did you have something? You raised your hand. I'm sorry.
I saw that Ryan Bogle has raised his hand.
Exactly. Okay, very good. I was going to recognize him as well. So Ryan, welcome, and floor is yours.
Great. Can you all hear me?
Yep.
Okay, you do perfect. So Chairman Villegas, Commissioners, thank you for allowing me to address the Commission today. My name is Ryan Bogle, and I'm here today speaking on behalf of about 60 property owners who live along the Levee and Pocket and Greenhaven neighborhoods in Sacramento. All of our parcels go back to the river, and they're currently protected from trespassers by cross-levee fences. And with the upcoming SAFCA levee work along the Sacramento River, those fences are going to be taken down, but we're hoping they're going to be allowed to go back up once the work is completed. There was an October workshop from the Central Valley Flood Protection Board that addressed the cross-levee fences. And during this workshop, Executive Director Vink spoke in support of the proposed Sacramento River Parkway. Now, while he didn't clearly state that the commission was against the re-permitting of the cross-levee fences, it felt as if that was what was inferred by the fact that he spoke and a representative of the city of Sacramento spoke in favor of the open levees for the parkway. I understand the Greater California Delta Trail is a large part of the commission's plan over the decade. It's been a big part of the commission's plans for over a decade. And that the Sacramento River Parkway is a large part of this overall trail system. I just don't know that the two issues of the River Parkway and the cross-levee fences should be conflated. The problem with the flood board not allowing us to re-permit cross-levee fences after the construction work is that once those fences come down, the public will begin using this, our backyards as bike trails, as access to the river for fishing. And so for us, it's really an issue of liability, safety, and privacy. It could be a decade or more before the city completes their bike trail. And during that time, we'll have liability for any injury that happens behind our homes. There's going to be no patrolling by the city of this area, no funding for cleanup, and really, it's a levee stability issue as well with fishermen cutting paths down to the water. So until such time as the city of Sacramento secured both funding and land rights to finish their trail, I'd ask the commission to stand with private property owners and ask that you take the position that while you're in favor of the Sacramento River Parkway, until the time that the parkway exists, that you are not against cross-levee fences in order to protect private property rights.
Okay, Brian, does that conclude your public testimony?
It does, yes.
All right, very good. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, we these are items that are not on the agenda. They've not been formally noticed, so we typically wouldn't take, there's no board action, obviously. But in the interest of certainly recognizing the predicament that you and the many property owners are in, Erik, did you have anything you wanted to respond as it relates to the public testimony at this point?
Well, I would certainly like to follow up with Ryan on this matter. It's really squarely in the hands of the city of Sacramento. His characterization of the Great Delta Trail is correct. We do have a statutory mandate to work to create a trail network through the Delta that links the Sacramento River Trail with trails in the urban areas of Contra Costa County. So we would be supportive of the actions the city would take to create additional trail opportunities. But I certainly would like to follow up with Ryan on this matter.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I think it's certainly within the spirit of what I believe has been a long-term goal, which is to bring everybody along. And all the property owners obviously need to be brought along because there's a lot of them along the way, as we all well know. So yeah, so Brian, I think what you're hearing from Erik is that there'll be an offline conversation about how we can be helpful in what I think you're asking, which seems reasonable. And so I'd be happy to facilitate or be a part of that conversation as well. All right.
Very, very good. Thank you.
Very good. All right. Thank you for coming. All right. That's the only public comment we have. Is that correct?
That was the only hand raised, yes.
All right. Very good. Okay, so that takes us to that's item 3. Item 4 is the chair's report on the Delta Stewardship Council activities. I just have a very brief report. We had a meeting earlier today, and there were a couple items I wanted to share with the commission. The council did meet, and there were 2 items that are certainly interesting, to say the least. Item 6 earlier today was the key, staff presented the key draft findings of the Delta Adapts Vulnerability Assessment. I think many of you have heard of the effort, and I think I've even reported on some of it here. As you know, in summary, it's the climate change impacts in the Delta and what we can anticipate as it relates to equity and flooding and water supply and ecosystem. Staff did a wonderful job of sort of laying out kind of the draft findings. These are just the findings, and then obviously the adaptation strategy is kind of right on the heels of this draft document. Staff did a really good job. I can't say that enough in terms of just laying out just how complicated things are going to be going forward. There are some significant concerns, obviously. So I would encourage this commission certainly to, if interested, to track the status of the Delta Adapts effort and the work that staff is doing as it relates to that. In fact, we might even consider having a presentation at some point in the future so that this body can further digest what is anticipated as part of that effort. So a good presentation nonetheless. And then we also received the Delta Levee investment strategy update by staff, and as reported here as well, that's a big ticket item that last year staff was moving towards the rulemaking process for that effort. That was slowed down by the fact that there was additional information as it relates to the LiDAR technology and mapping of the topography of the Delta Levees. And so today's effort, or today's update, provided us with what I think is a good step forward, and that is an MOU between the Stewardship Council, DWR, and the Central Valley Flood Protection staff to work together on this effort. So there's more to come there, but the update is simply that we're continuing to update the technology and the data that we'll be using to bring forward a Delta Levee investment strategy in the near future. So that was what we discussed today in large part. Are there any questions regarding either of those items? Great. Hearing and seeing none, that takes us to item 5, which is commissioner comments and announcements. Are there any announcements by any members of the commission? Right.
Mr. Chair, this is Commissioner Agar.
Yes, sir.
I just wanted to check in with Eric to see when's a good time to mention an update on what Caltrans is doing in regards to communication of our public outreach of projects that we're doing out there. And I do want to share a map, but I didn't want to share it this time unless there's a different time frame to do this. So looking to Executive Director Eric to direct me if this is appropriate time or not.
Yeah, that would be great, Commissioner Agar.
Okay, very good. So for my update in regards to Caltrans in working with the Delta region, I know that the coalition's directors met with our director about a month or two ago and met with our director and our chief deputy and talking about, what are we doing to help our outreach and communication of all the projects that are going on in the Delta region among the 3 districts. Just to inform everyone, the 3 district directors, including myself, continue to meet, but we're formalizing our Caltrans Delta Steering Committee to address some of these issues so that our team and our efforts will be more focused and coordinated appropriately. And one of the biggest things we're working on is that outreach. And one of the things I'd like to share here in a moment is a map of showing what's happening within the Delta region among the 3 districts, and whether it's construction projects, maintenance projects, even local projects that we're working on. So we have a draft map that we like to show you, and I do have one of our Caltrans members joining us. His name is Bart Ney. He's our District 4 Chief Public Affairs and Strategic Communication Office. Again, that's in District 4 area. And we have a map we like to show you just to give you a taste of what type of communication and great information that would be shared to the communities and to this commission as well. So Bart, you want to go ahead and get started on that, just to show the map if you have it, or maybe Eric, do you have it to show?
Well, I forwarded it to you, Eric, but let me see if I can share it just to make it easy.
You've been given rights. You'll just need to share screen from the bottom.
Okay, let's see if this works. Share. Can you guys see this?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, as Dennis was saying, what we've done is the 3 districts have come together, used a GIS and a little bit of graphic art, and pulled together the work that's going on in the Delta regions right now. I know it's a little bit inside baseball, Caltrans baseball, to say that there's these 3 districts, but all of our groups are coming together to work as one, so we can better communicate to the community out in the Delta. And so what this map represents, it's a little bit big. I'll scroll down a little bit. We listed all of our construction projects out that are ongoing now throughout the next year, and then we plotted them in the different areas in the region, so that you can see exactly where work is going to be going on. And this is what we'll be communicating as we go through the next year. It's a work in progress. Obviously, things will change as we get projects approved and we complete projects. But we wanted to get at least a baseline out there so that we could have something to work from in our communications.
Thank you, Bart. And just to add to that, our districts are, again, coordinating to make sure how we better communicate, such as this map, which is focused for upcoming construction seasons. I think we looked out for the next construction season of 21-22. And so we want to make sure we coordinate with our local partners as well with any projects that are going on in your area. We are also reaching out to the different communities, advocacy groups, coalitions, other contacts we can get, so we can grow our outreach in all areas, and so we don't leave anybody out. So it's been a work in progress, and we're going to continue to work hard to communicate better to the Delta region. That's my update, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Bart, for joining us.
Pleasure.
Questions?
Can I just speak up?
Absolutely, jump in.
I try to follow. It would be great to get that information to my office. I saw quite a bit of activity in my county and on the edges, so I would love to get a copy of that when that's available.
Yeah, Commissioner Burgess, I will send this to commission members and to our Delta Protection Advisory Committee as well. They'll be quite interested to see this. And thank you both, Bart and Commissioner Agar, for presenting it.
Really good.
Mr. Chair, this is Director Antoli.
Yep, absolutely. Jump in, Don.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Commissioner Agar, and certainly I was one of the representatives from the Delta Counties Coalition, along with Supervisor Vasquez from Solana County, who had a chance to talk with some of the commissioners' colleagues and with the actual Caltrans commissioner, and it was and directors from the various districts. And I would just say that was very helpful, and I wanted to thank him for bringing the map, because this was one, as you point out, one of the suggestions, I think, to try to help better coordinate and communicate planned work, as well as where the timing fit for some of these projects and how it would affect the motoring public, but also obviously communities and various activities in the Delta, certainly business activities. But people's living arrangements and travel arrangements to and from work and such, and during both recreation as well as harvest and planting seasons and such. And so I just wanted to thank him. And I think, as Eric said, certainly providing this information, and I guess this is updated too, to maybe, if we could have something, in the spring when prior to construction season, if things change, either additions or, or things are, postponed for another period of time. But I just wanted to thank you, Commissioner Agar, for following up and for all of your colleagues' work as well. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, Vice Chair.
Any other comments? Actually, at the risk of maybe saying this, I actually think, based on what Don just said, we might want to maybe consider formalizing this a bit more, Commissioner Agar. I think the notion of using this body and this opportunity to help distribute information as it relates to projected construction seasons and projects in the Delta. As we all know, there's nothing worse than finding out at the last minute when you're stuck behind a long line of cars that there's been a massive construction project in the works for months and months and you didn't know about it. And so I think this might actually serve as a great forum, and I would defer to Eric to figure out what that might look like in the event that there's interest in it. But I think having you on the commission, your staff providing that information to our staff, using this as a venue to educate the public about projected construction projects, because I think it's helpful to Caltrans to have people know about it so they can avoid that area. And it's also helpful to the public itself so that they don't run into the frustration of finding out at the last minute. So I would offer this body as a place to continue that dialogue and find ways to share that information so that we can make sure the public's aware.
I think it's a good idea. Yeah.
Yes, I would definitely support that and appreciate the idea to do that in this format and this to communicate better. Any way we can do it, communicate this information, and if it's through this commission, I will support that. Thank you.
Very good. More work to be had, but I think, as I said, I think it's a great opportunity to take advantage of it. So, all right. So with that, if there are no other questions, that concludes your report. Are there any other reports from any other commissioners? Seeing none, then let's see. Under the consent agendas, items 6 and 7, we have the September meeting minutes and the 2021 meeting dates. I think unless there are questions regarding either one of those items, we can take those both together if there's a motion to move the two.
So moved, Natoli.
This is Burgess, second.
All right. So we have a motion and a second. And so I believe we need a roll call vote unless there's a question. Okay, Madam Clerk, if you'll call the roll on that item.
You got it. Chair Villegas,
Yes.
Vice Chair Natoli,
Aye.
Commissioner Wynn,
Yes.
Commissioner Burgess,
Yes.
Commissioner Thompson,
Yes.
Commissioner Krieg,
Yes.
Commissioner Sandine,
Aye.
Commissioner Nakanishi,
Yes.
Commissioner Paroli, repeating Commissioner Paroli. We'll come back.
Aye.
Oh, thank you. Commissioner Musi? Repeating Commissioner Musi? Commissioner Agar?
Aye.
Commissioner Lester Moffitt?
Abstain. I was not at the last meeting.
Thank you. Commissioner Vogel?
Aye.
Commissioner Bush?
Yes.
And Madam Clerk, you missed Commissioner Slater.
I apologize, Commissioner Slater.
That's okay. I'll have to abstain too. I wasn't there.
Thank you. Looks like the motion carries by a vote of 11-0 with 2 abstaining.
Very good. Okay, thank you, Madam Clerk. That takes care of items 6 and 7. Item 8 is Executive Director's Report, so that's you, Eric.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Chair and Commission members. First off, I'd like to welcome Nicole Rinke to our meeting. Nicole is our stepping in as our Commission Counsel for this meeting. She'll be joining us for our next meeting as well, because our usual Commission Counsel, Carlos Mejia, is tending to a new child, little baby Adriana. I just saw a photo. She's delightful. And we wish Carlos and his family well on their new arrival. And thank you to Nicole for joining us. Jumping right into my report, let me talk first a little bit about the Delta Conveyance Project, the single tunnel. Commission staff, myself, and Program Manager Virginia Gardiner continue to meet with DWR Delta Conveyance Office staff. We had a meeting earlier this week. And it's an opportunity to share information. We always learn a lot about how the planning at the DWR end is going for this single tunnel. Lately, we've been we've been talking about and wanting to engage related to recreation planning associated with the tunnel design, and how that links in with the Davis-Dahlwig Act, which is the responsibility for the state water project to provide recreation pursuant to their facilities. We also learned earlier this week about the conceptual thinking from DWR on a community benefits fund, and it's expected that at the next stakeholder engagement committee of the Design and Construction Authority, which is slated for December 9th, that will be presented in greater detail. So we'll report back on that the next time the commission meets. We continue to monitor those meetings of both the Construction Authority and the Stakeholder Engagement Committee. As many of you are aware, DWR has been distributing a survey throughout the Delta, an environmental justice survey entitled Your Delta, Your Voice. They'll continue to request participants in that survey through December 11th. Others of you are familiar with the soil investigations. Those have begun and are already stirring up a little bit of dust, at least in the North Delta. Those will continue. Those are the soil investigations to learn more about the underground conditions where the tunneling is planned. We are working with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. They're the federal agency lead under the National Environmental Policy Act, and they will be preparing an environmental impact statement for the tunnel project. Their scoping period ended on October 20th. The commission provided scoping comments that were very similar to the scoping comments we provided on the DWR's environmental impact report. And we did provide a copy of that letter to commission members. Both the EIR and the EIS are expected to be out in draft form sometime in mid-2022. So we're still a good almost year and a half away from those draft documents. Finally, related to the core NEPA process, the commission requested cooperating agency status. That would basically enable us to review administrative drafts of the EIS. That request was denied by the Corps. At the same time, or at a different time, but on the similar timeline, we did request, were asked to and have requested, and it's been agreed that we will participate in what they call the Section 106 consultation, which is under the National Historic Preservation Act. And this has to do with historic and cultural resources that could be affected by the proposed project. So we will be participating on that and reporting back in the future. Moving on, commission members, to our commission, the review of our commission strategic plan. Our commission strategic plan, Vision 2030, looks like this. And believe it or not, we're more than 5 years into that strategic plan. We've initiated a review of that at the staff level. We also had a great visit with the Delta Protection Advisory Committee earlier in the month and reviewed it with them as well. We're talking about what significant changes may have occurred since the adoption of the strategic plan and what future trends may inform potential updates to that plan. So we've initiated the review at the staff level and with DPAC. Our intention is to next produce a concept draft. That's something that I would like to review with our commission chair and vice chair. And then that will ultimately lead to reporting back to the full commission, perhaps at the January meeting or the March meeting, about how we might look to revise or at least refresh the 2015 general plan. So more information to come on that. Switching gears to the Delta Heritage Forum, we had a very successful Delta Heritage Forum on November 6th. It was a full day event on the Zoom channel, our favorite channel. And we had over 100 participants. Tip of the hat to Blake Roberts, who I will also report has been promoted as our new program manager at the commission. So congratulations to Blake, both on his promotion to a program manager, but also for leading and conducting a very successful Delta Heritage Forum just a few weeks back. Thank you to Commissioner Agar, and I appreciate Bart Nay's participation talking about Caltrans efforts coordinating amongst the 3 districts that touch the Delta region. That was a great report. I won't add to that except to say that we continue to develop plans for convening some type of transportation summit or meeting, again on the Zoom channel, and more details to come on that in the future. Getting closer to wrapping up here, I just wanted to mention Delta flood preparedness. This is very hot off the presses, and I'm very excited about this. This is our 2021 Delta flood preparedness calendar. It's a joint effort between the Commission and the Department of Water Resources. We appreciate the support from DWR in helping to print this. The Commission will be distributing this calendar to the interior Delta, about over 5,000 households in zip codes in those more flood-prone communities in the deep interior Delta. And that's related to Delta Flood Preparedness Week, which was held on October 17th through 24th, where we engaged in a robust social media campaign. Our lead on this, Stacy Hayden, our Commission Information Officer, developed materials for River Delta Unified School District to distribute to their students in both English and Spanish. In addition, she's working with Stockton-based Latino Times to share more information through their platforms, both in English and Spanish as well. So the flood preparedness efforts continue. A pretty light month for Commission land use letters, but there were 2, including our scoping comment letter on the Delta Tunnel project, that are in the table on page 4 of my report. And then in addition, included in my report is a update on our website and social media metrics. And we continue to attract visitation and engagement through our social media, and more details are presented toward the conclusion of my report. In addition, also included toward the conclusion of my report is an update on just a broad range of activities that we're involved with that will give you more detail if you're interested in the day-to-day working of your commission staff. And then, of course, the budget and spending update for our current fiscal year 20-21 is included as well. And Mr. Chair, that concludes what I wanted to report on the from my report to you all.
All right, very good. Thank you, Eric. Are there any questions of Eric's Executive Director report? Right, we'll come back to the commission in a moment. Is there any public testimony or comments on the ED report?
I see no hands raised.
All right, very good. So back to the commission. Are there any comments or questions regarding Eric's report? I think I hear somebody. So I'll remind everybody to please mute your phones, your devices. All right, so if there are no comments or questions regarding Eric's report, then that will take us to item 9, which is the election of the 21-22 commission chair and vice chair. And so Eric, I know there's a process or there's a routine for some of this. So do you want to explain kind of what the normal steps would be in this point?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. So the commission's chair is selected from the membership of the county supervisors. That's according to statute, Public Resources Code 29739. What has been customary for the commission has been for the county supervisors to follow a rotation in terms of who serves as chair and vice chair. According to that rotation, current vice chair Don Natoli would elevate to chair, and Commissioner Nguyen from San Joaquin County would move into the vice chair slot. And this is proposed to take effect as of January 11th, just so it follows the 2-year schedule. And it occurs before our next commission meeting, which will be January 21st. And also it's worth noting to commission members that our chair also serves as a member of the Delta Stewardship Council. And so just that reminder as well. But Mr. Chair, I think it would be appropriate to have either a nomination or a motion to elect a chair and vice chair as of 2021 for a 2-year period.
All right. Is there anybody interested in making a motion to follow our customary routine?
Yeah, this is Commissioner Burgess, Chair Villegas. I just want to say, wow, it's gone really fast. You've done a really great job, and I would like to nominate Commissioner Natoli for chair and Commissioner Nguyen for vice chair.
I'll second that. Thompson.
All right, very good. Thank you, you two. Thank you, Diane. All right, so we have a motion and a second. Are there any other comments, questions regarding that motion? Because if not, we will ask the Madam Clerk to take the roll.
You got it. Chair Villegas,
Yes.
Vice Chair Natoli,
Aye, and I want to just second what Diane said. Oscar did a great job, and we'll get a chance to thank you more at the January meeting. Thanks.
fantastic. Thank you. Commissioner Burgess,
Yes. I think you skipped.
Commissioner Nguyen, yes.
Yes.
Commissioner Thompson,
Yes.
Commissioner Krieg,
Yes.
Commissioner Sandine,
Yes.
Commissioner Nakanishi,
Yes.
Commissioner Paroli,
Yes.
Commissioner Slater,
Yes.
Commissioner Agar,
Yes.
Commissioner Lester Moffitt,
Yes.
Commissioner Vogel,
Yes.
Commissioner Bush.
Yes.
Okay, motion carries by a vote of 14-0.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you all. And thank you for the comments, and I'm looking forward to handing it over. It's been a lot of fun the last couple of years. So thank you. All right. If there are no other comments or questions or any other public testimony regarding that item there, which is item 9. Yes, item 9. That'll take us to item 10, which is to receive a report on the Delta Stewardship Council science activities. And I believe Assistant ED Natasha Nelson is going to introduce this item. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes, that's correct.
All yours.
I just wanted to thank Delta Stewardship Council for joining us today. They have a staff of approximately 20 people that work hard on different aspects of science. And I've been kind of interacting with their meetings as well as our executive director since we both started, Eric in 2015 and me in 2016. So we've seen a lot of changes, in particular the interest for social sciences. And so we wanted to bring Amanda Bohl from the science program over to talk about some of the efforts, just sort of a light skim over all of them. And then to explain social science, we've invited Dr. Mark Lubell from our local UC Davis. So I did just change Amanda's, she should be able to unmute. And let me check, since I'm trying to do that at the same time, that's working. Amanda, can you speak?
Can you hear me? I can
We
speak.
can.
You hear
And
me?
Stacy
Okay,
will,
great.
now that we've been able to see you, we can start your slides. Stacy has them.
Great. Okay. Well, good afternoon, almost evening. And thank you, Chair Villegas, and thank you, Natasha. And I'm happy to be here to update the Commission on Delta Science activities. As Natasha mentioned, the Delta Science Program is one division of the Delta Stewardship Council, and we have approximately 20, that sounds about right, staff that work in the science division. We also have a planning division and admin division. And I want to kind of preface everything I'm saying by noting that at the council, we really, the planning and the science divisions really work together on a lot of these issues, so in a lot of these initiatives. And so everything I'm talking about and we'll be updating you all on today are things that are worked on by both the science program and the planning division, and really benefit from kind of that cross-divisional approach to the work that we're doing. So I serve as a special assistant for planning and science, which primarily means that I coordinate the Delta Plan Interagency Implementation Committee, also known as DPAC. And DPAC was created by the 2009 Delta Reform Act, and its membership consists of 18 state and federal agencies with a role in implementing the Delta Plan. And the chair of the commission has a seat at DPAC. DPAC strives to facilitate Delta Plan implementation through collaboration in support of shared national, statewide, and local goals for the Delta. DPAC meets 3 times a year and crafts agendas that highlight the interconnections of the Delta Plan with initiatives, plans, and programs of DPAC agencies, and really tries to explore the opportunities to align agencies' actions in the Delta watershed. So during my presentation, I'll be discussing a few key initiatives that the Council and the Delta Science Program in particular are leading, but which, as I mentioned, also included a lot of coordination and collaboration with DPAC and its member agencies, which is why I wanted to give you just a bit of background on DPAC. So these initiatives that I'll be covering are the Science Action Agenda, the Science Needs Assessment, and then social science integration in the Delta, and the role that the Delta Stewardship Council has taken in promoting that integration. So next slide, please. So first, I'm going to discuss the Science Action Agenda and the Science Needs Assessment. So these are 2 initiatives that are very complementary and progressing simultaneously and in very close coordination. The impetus for both of these efforts is really to develop a vision for science activities and governance that will respond to the evolving management needs of the Delta and Sassoon Marsh. The primary difference between these 2, which we'll explore a bit more fully throughout this presentation, are really timing. The Science Action Agenda focuses on more near-term science needs, whereas the Science Needs Assessment is looking more long-term, striving to identify science actions that will help us answer long-term questions, especially in the context of climate change. Next slide, please. So first, some details about the Science Needs Assessment. So in February 2019, the Delta Independent Science Board sent a letter to DPAC suggesting the development of a strategic science needs assessment. The ISB recognized that environmental conditions are changing at an increasing rate due to climate change, sea level rise, new invasive species, shifts of land use, and increasing demands for water. And so to better address these drivers and stressors, the Delta ISB via their letter to DPAC, requested that the Delta science management and local stakeholder communities be bolder, more forward-looking, and better integrate science and management to address these challenges, which routinely span the mandates of multiple agencies. So in response, DPAC included the science needs assessment as a priority action in the Delta Science Funding and Governance Initiative, which is an initiative that DPAC began a couple of years ago to really start to explore how to make the Delta science enterprise more efficient, better funded, and more coordinated. Next slide, please. So the science needs assessment will be a comprehensive scientific needs assessment based on the fundamental system-wide and management challenges facing the Delta. And more specifically, it's really going to try to identify future Delta conditions and the fundamental driving forces of those conditions, identify science needs to forecast and help predict how the Delta might change under these conditions. It's going to include and has included a lot of stakeholder engagement. And it's really, trying to encourage a more aggressive multi-agency collaboration to provide leadership and an effective structure for creative, scientific, and technical integration. Next slide. So to develop the science needs assessment, a multi-stakeholder planning team was assembled, and a workshop was originally planned for April 2020. Like so many things over the past year, when COVID hit, we had to adjust. The workshop was rescheduled for early October. And so between April and October, though, we did not want to kind of lose the momentum and lose the ideas that we had started to develop to help us develop the science needs assessment. So we held 4 virtual forums to begin to discuss the questions that we had originally planned to spend 2 full conference days exploring. And so the questions that we explored through these virtual forums were, what do we need to know about, or what do we know about projected climate change impacts on the Delta? Or what do we think we know right now? What questions does that raise for management decisions? And what do managers need to know? What science needs to be done to give management the answers that they're looking for? And then finally, what changes are needed, if any, for science governance, funding, and then how to better integrate everything that we're trying to do. Next slide. So these 4 discussions prepared us for what became a virtual workshop consisting of 2 half days of breakout discussions. So the workshop, instead of having a whole bunch of plenaries and breakout groups, which is a lot of times how conferences and workshops work, we really focused these 2 half days on discussions. And so we pulled people together into different breakout rooms to explore how we can identify key science needs and capacity needs and tools that can provide us with the answers and insights for the likely management questions that we're going to have under a changing Delta. And then we also used this time, these 2 half days, to discuss how to organize the science enterprise to better address these complex and changing problems. Next slide. So day 1 of the workshop focused on the question, what do we need to know to support future decisions in multiple management areas? And so we had a few different questions. We broke folks up into 8 different management questions, or management themed areas: water supply, flood management, habitat, native species, non-native invasive species, water quality, land use, and then Delta as an evolving place. And so folks had, participants had a good hour, close to hour and a half to really kind of start diving into questions related to these particular management areas. Next slide, please. And then day 2 focused on the governance of the Delta Science Enterprise, and in particular, what we need to do to develop a structure to support, encourage, and accomplish our science needs. And all of this, both days, was really discussed in the context of rapid change and the need to be adaptive and anticipatory. Next slide, please. So, and then this brings us to the Science Action Agenda. The Science Action Agenda aligns science actions to meet management needs and identifies emerging science actions and gaps in knowledge. And so just as a reminder, the science needs assessment was kind of more long-term looking, trying to figure out, okay, what do we need to start doing now to kind of help us in the future? And then the Science Action Agenda is really looking at kind of the short term, like what is it that we need to be doing now? What management questions do we need to be answering now? And what are the science actions that we need to do to help us get there? And I'll explore that just a little bit more here in a moment. So the Science Action Agenda is really important because it prioritizes science actions, it guides science investments, like the Delta Science Proposal Solicitation Notice, which is referenced in the staff report that accompanies this presentation. And then it also really promotes collaboration and transparency. Next slide, please. So the Science Action Agenda Update is a multi-year collaborative process with multiple opportunities throughout for public participation and engagement. So new for this science action. So again, we did one that covered 2017 to 2022, and now we're working on updating that one. And so for this iteration, we are developing a more comprehensive and publicly vetted list of management questions to really ensure that the science actions included in the final science action agenda better inform policy and management. We really want to make sure that what we're doing and what we're suggesting in terms of science actions really directly link back to what we feel managers and decision makers need to know to help them make decisions. Next slide. So the Science Action Agenda effort is currently finalizing its short list of management questions, and this is expected to be completed by the end of this year. These management questions will be used to inform the science needs assessment, and ideas and decisions from the science needs assessment workshop and the resulting assessment document will inform the Science Action Agenda scope of near-term science action. So we really do, as I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, we really do see these two processes as working very collaboratively and both kind of key parts of kind of the overall Delta science strategy. Next slide, please. So here I'm going to shift gears just a little bit to social science. And so really I'll be focusing more on the council's efforts around integrating social sciences into the Delta. And then Dr. Lubell will be talking much more in detail about the social sciences and what's kind of happening currently in the Delta. So just as a reminder, social sciences, excuse me, social science is the process of describing, explaining, and predicting human behavior and institutional structures in interaction with their environments. And examples of social science include psychology, sociology, economics, human geography, political science, history, and others. Historically, our science focus in the Delta has been on the natural sciences. Engaging with the breadth of these social science disciplines can help to bring understanding to the human dimensions of the complex water and environmental challenges and questions that we face here in the Delta and in furthering the state's co-equal goals. And this is particularly important in light of climate change. Next slide, please. So last year, the council, in partnership with UC Davis, formed the Social Science Task Force. The task force, which was made up of social scientists from across the country, provided recommendations on how to integrate more social science in the Delta, focusing on funding, research, and building capacity for the social sciences. The hope is that agencies and entities in the Delta will use these recommendations to build capacity for conducting social science, will integrate social and natural sciences, and advance the co-equal goals. So this report included 3 findings and 8 associated recommendations that I really won't go into too much here unless you have specific questions. But I do want to mention just one of them because I think it's very exciting, I think, for everyone in the Delta. Finding 1 from the report addressed the current limited social science capacity and investment in the Delta, and it had a related recommendation to invest in internal social science capacity. So to this end, the council has partnered with California Sea Grant and is welcoming a social sciences extension specialist. And we're very happy to announce that Dr. Jessica Rudnick, who just completed her PhD at UC Davis and has done much work in the Delta already, will be joining the council on December 7th. And we're very excited to welcome Dr. Rudnick and to really help us take the lead in helping to encourage the integration of more social sciences in the Delta. So as I mentioned, Dr. Lubell will now be providing a deeper dive into social science. And then if there's time, I'm happy to answer questions now or later.
All right. So Natasha, do you want to continue to facilitate the conversation, or do you want me to, or are you done?
I just wanted to make sure I said thank you.
All right. Right. All right. So are there any questions or comments regarding the presentation at this point?
I do not see any raised hands, but
Okay.
So we can start with Dr. Lubell.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Awesome, thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me to make a presentation about social science to the Delta Protection Commission. I'm always happy to advocate for the role of social science. I'm a professor in the Department of Environmental Science and Policy at UC Davis. I study cooperation problems in the context of natural resource management and environmental policy. I've done a lot of work in cooperation with the Delta Science Program and looking at sea level rise, invasive species management, and lots of other things, science governance in the Delta. So I'm pretty familiar with lots of things that are going on. All my information is there on this beginning slide. So next slide, please. So I'll just briefly cover 3 topics, my view on what social science is and why it's important. A quick proof of concept by looking at some work I did on invasive Spartina in San Francisco Bay in the Delta, and then some thoughts about strategies for engaging social science. So next slide, please. Okay, so I'm going to grant you a magic wand, and I'm going to tell you that I've solved every single biophysical, engineering, natural science problem there is. You've got perfect models, perfect certainty about when hurricanes are coming, what climate change is going to happen, what sea level rise, when invasive species are coming. And, you know, all that money that you've given to the biophysical sciences over the years, you can give it all to the social sciences now because all the biophysical problems have been solved. And so, for example, you look at that hurricane track there, I can now perfectly predict it for you. But is that enough? Is that enough to prevent the sorts of devastation that we saw in the pictures that we have here in Puerto Rico of Hurricane Maria, where you see the destruction of the electricity grid, all the immediate consequences of the flooding? I will 100% guarantee you that solving the biophysical sciences and engineering sciences problems is not even close to enough to be able to solve the social ecological problems that you're facing in places like Puerto Rico and really everywhere in the world, globally, in the Delta, in the Bay, anything you can think of. Okay, next slide, please. So we spend a lot of money in the Delta and other places on understanding the biophysical system, hydrological models, how plant diseases and invasive species spread, climate change forecasts, fire models, crop productivity, all kinds of models with different micro level processes of the system built into them. But there's often a big black box question mark for the social system. Next slide, please. So when we're looking at the social system, where social scientists come in is to understand the individual behavior, how they're linked to the networks, their relationships with each other, the social capital that they're involved with, how those networks and individuals are organized into communities, how organizations interact with each other and with individuals and communities in the policy sphere. The policies themselves, the formal rules and the informal rules. I was interested to hear in your earlier discussion that you have formal rules about electing commissioners, but you also have customary aspects of it too. So it's always the case that the informal and the formal rules work together to make institutions function. All that stuff, like in all the complex sets of rules and organizations and individuals in the Delta, they're nested in the broader political system of California and the cultural system of California, which is different than the political system and cultural system in Florida. And then in the US, it's different than China and different than the Netherlands and so on. So all the social scientists study all of that type of stuff from multiple disciplines, and it's not just economics, it's political science, anthropology, psychology, political science, all those different sorts of disciplines come to bear. Next slide, please. So I guess that, you know, I said most of that just now. So we have different theories about individual behavior. Those theories target social, economic, political, and cultural processes. We use quantitative and qualitative research to test those hypotheses. So for example, I study governance and cooperation. I use a lot of quantitative network analysis. I interview people, a lot of survey analysis. And you really have to think of it we're just like any other scientist. We have theories, we test hypotheses, we use methods to do our science. It requires money to get that science done. Good environmental policy people strive to link that science to policy. So do policy engagement like I guess I'm doing right now to inform people, and also interdisciplinary work. So we're doing work not just in our own bubble of social science, but we link with biophysical scientists to do social ecological or coupled human natural dimension sort of analysis. Next slide, please. So a quick example from my own work. Many of you probably know that Spartina is an invasive seagrass in the Bay Area. That's been a big problem in the Bay Area, and it had a little bit in the Delta itself. And there was a program called the San Francisco Estuary Invasive Spartina Project that was started by the California Coastal Commission in 2000. Next slide, please. And this program has done a pretty good job in my mind of it hasn't eliminated all the Spartina, and there's certain conflicts with endangered species, but it's really eliminated like 90% of the Spartina. So one of the questions is what, from a governance perspective, makes this program work well? You have, you know, a lot of people will look at the invasive Spartina project and say, hey, it's a local project. It's got a local partnership with a lot of cooperation. Everybody must be hand-holding, kind of singing around the campfire to get that bottom-up sort of thing. And that's kind of the stereotype of what these local projects were. Next slide. So what I did is I did a network analysis of all the actors who work together in the context of the Spartina project. And this is just a picture. The nodes here are different organizations and who works with who that I gathered from a survey. And when you look at this type of network, it turns out that it's quite centralized. So there's a couple of agencies, California Coastal Commission, the contractor who's managing the invasive Spartina project. They were kind of like the boss that were directing everybody, and everybody was going to them for information, doing the coordination. So it was a local project that did very well, but it wasn't a case where everybody's cooperating with everybody. It was a case where there's a couple of central actors that kind of had the baton and were really able to get everybody else to coordinate. Next slide, please. And this just gives you a little bit closer view of those key actors: this Coastal Conservancy, Spartina Project, Fish and Wildlife Service, you know, some of the consulting firms, some of the places where there was a heavy concentration of Spartina in the lands that they managed. So I do lots of network analysis. It's always fun to look at for me. Okay, so that's the example. I've kind of hopefully shown you that, you know, why social science matters, an example of it in action. Next slide. So the third topic is engaging social science, and this is where Amanda and I cross over quite a bit. So there are things happening in the Delta Science program that I think are great signs for further integrating social science into all the scientific activities happening in the Delta. We had the task force on which I was an advisor and actually presented some of this Spartina work there too. They did hire Jess Rednick, actually one of my former students. She is now going to be a lead person there, and they have another staff person who's a social scientist that they're hiring. More social scientists are showing up in advisory capacities in the Delta Science program and other places. So, for example, I'm on the scientific advisory board for the Delta, and I participate in things like the science needs assessment. So, you know, just getting social science sprinkled throughout the advisory structure, both informally and formally, is a good idea. And there's more money towards social science now. In the latest request for proposals from the Delta Science program, there is a stronger emphasis on social science and linking that social science to natural sciences. And another key thing that I like to point out for effectively engaging social science is that you have to appreciate what the culture of social science really is. We are often, as social scientists, treated as kind of an afterthought or a service bureau. It's like, all right, we've got the perfect hurricane model. Now you social scientists go and figure out how everybody is going to go out there and uptake that model into their planning processes, or think about risk management, taking into account a hurricane plan or a climate change forecast or something like that. But we are not, you know, good social scientists need to be appreciated on the same level as any biophysical scientist. We have theories, we have methods, we need money to be able to get things done. So we shouldn't be 1%, you know, if it's a social ecological systems project, the budget shouldn't be 95% biophysical sciences and 5% social sciences. You need to think about sharing resources in a way that we can actually do the work in a real way. And it's diverse. So a lot of economics is certainly important, and the boiling down things into cost benefits and dollars and cents is definitely something that's needed in a lot of cases, but there's lots of other things that social science brings to the table to understand human behavior that has policy relevance. And then you have to remember that we are good, at least some of us are good at working with natural scientists and policymakers and bringing the social science to bear in an integrated fashion. I love doing that stuff. My students, we train, some other programs we train to do that stuff. So we're quite naturals on it. There are definitely some social science departments, it's like they only care about their discipline and they're very inward looking, and honestly, you don't get too much from some of them, but there's a group of us that really like boundary spanning, and those are the sorts of people that you want to look for. So there's other things I could probably say there, but I'm probably out of time. So thank you for listening, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
All right. Are there any, first of all, thank you for the presentation. I love your energy about the social sciences. I'm also equally excited about it, and I've been since we started talking about this at the Stewardship Council. I do have a question, but I'm asking my colleagues, are there any questions of the professor's presentation at this point?
This is Nancy Vogel. I do have a question.
Jump on in, Nancy.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation, both Amanda and Dr. Lubell. How do you think the engagement of social scientists will shape the Council's science action agenda? In other words, what do you think the social science research is that will be of most help to policymakers in the Delta?
Well, I mean, there are things in the social science task force that are findings that I think are being integrated into the science action agenda. I myself am working on the governance side of things in the science needs assessment to think about how we might restructure strategies for restructuring the Delta Science program to be more anticipatory. And I think maybe Amanda, you might want to take that on a little bit too.
Yeah, absolutely. No, thanks for the question, Nancy or Commissioner Vogel. Yeah, I mean, one of the things that, as I mentioned, that the first step in this version of this update to the science action agenda is the identification of management questions. And a lot of the questions, and in order to develop those, the science program collected over 1,000 questions from folks throughout the Delta. And a lot of those, like, I don't know what percentage, but a lot of them were social science based. And so we're now in the process of condensing those, of really figuring out which ones to keep. I think we're down to about 100, and that has been a very public participatory process to do that culling. And a lot of them, we're anticipating being very social science based. And so that's going to then help us identify social actions or science actions that will help to address and answer those questions. So we really do expect the social sciences to be very fully integrated and included in this version of the science action agenda. Does that make sense?
Yes, I just wondered what
Okay,
you think, which kind of social research or social science research.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have the specifics right in front of me, but I mean, I think a lot of things related to climate change and people adapting to climate change. We're seeing a lot of things like that. People, when we look at restoration in the Delta, folks' responses to that and using more social sciences to understand how to work with folks around that, where, the best places to be doing restoration and things like that. So I think it's focusing a lot of kind of those types of areas, but I think there are probably some others as well.
Thank you.
This is Natasha Nelson. I just received the 100 questions, and I actually think about 30 of them would be of interest to our decision makers. And some of it's about flooding as well, and how people perceive flood risk, and also about how we can best create trust among stakeholders, which is a broader issue, not related to any particular project or program. So I think there's a lot of opportunities for behavioral scientists to come and work on our issues. I think just defining them helps put out the call a little bit that, hey, you know, we're interested in these. We'd like to have researchers here.
Great. Are there any other comments or questions by any other members of the commission?
This is Commissioner Burgess. I really enjoyed this presentation. As someone that worked within the watershed and had to, you know, bring a lot of people together, I think this type of thinking is a way of not only engaging more, but it's about creating more ownership and more empowerment and all of that. And I think the other part of it is building bridges. There's people that will disagree on the science or the facts, but if you can get your goals together and come up with a common goal, and I think social sciences are very helpful in that. And it helps people speak each other's language in all different types of ways. So I'm really encouraged to see this at this level, and I appreciate your presentation.
Great. Thank you. Any other comments or questions? Well, thank you both. Thank you, Natasha, for introducing the item. Thank you, Amanda, for doing what you do. Professor, thank you very much for your energy and excitement about the social sciences. I'm dying to read about the social science retrospective on the pandemic a year and a half from now, when you know, the real story comes out about what happened and what we could have done differently, because I think social science retro is going to be quite interesting to see what folks talk about on a completely different subject matter. But thank you for that. So are there any other final comments or questions on this item? Natasha, did we get through the item completely? Are you finished?
Yes, we do have a comment in the chat.
Okay.
From Ms. Barbara Daly, just asking about Water Code 85054, about preserving and protecting recreation, agriculture, culture, and natural resources in the Delta as an evolving place when we're talking about water supply reliability and ecosystem restoration. I know they're slightly separate programs. I think that's part of it, is we do have those 3 channels at the council where science is science alone, and then there's the planning, which implements the Delta plan. So I would say, you know, since, as Amanda spoke to, they're pretty integrated, but I think a lot of this is separate from what's written in the water code.
Hey. And thank you, Nancy. Your question answered the response to your question answered my question. So, all right, that's it for item 10. Is that correct?
Thanks all for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you. Looking forward.
Thank you very much, speakers.
Yep. Thank you. All right, that takes us to item 11, which is the National Heritage Area. We have a couple different items to consider. One is the appointments to the Delta NHA Management Plan Advisory Committee, and then we're going to be asked to provide some delegated authority to Eric to enter into a contract. So I think, let's see, Eric, are you presenting that item?
Yeah, I'll lead off, Mr. Chair, and then I'm going to turn it over to Blake Roberts for Part B. So commission members, at our last meeting on September 17th, you all approved a charter for the National Heritage Area Management Plan Advisory Committee. Subsequent to that meeting, we solicited applications. Vice Chair Natoli and Commissioner Vogel joined me in reviewing those applications, and they recommended 15 voting members and 2 ex officio members of the Management Plan Advisory Committee. I should have noted that in the meeting packet for the commission is both the staff report, which includes the names of the proposed appointees, as well as a copy of the commission chart, the committee charter, and the list of applicants who submitted applications. We collected those until early November. So tonight we're asking for approval of appointees to the National Heritage Area Management Plan Advisory Committee. And Mr. Chair, would you like me to read the names real quick, or should we just refer people to the staff report so they can take a look at that themselves?
Is there a preference? Would folks like to hear the names?
Well, maybe when there's a motion made, if commission members could speak up at that time, we could certainly list the names. Now I'd like to turn it over to Blake Roberts, Mr. Chair, to handle part B of this agenda item, having to do with the amending the contract with Point Heritage Development Consulting.
Blake, you need to unmute yourself.
Okay, I forgot about that. Okay, let me try this again. So good evening, Chair Villegas and members of the commission. My name is Blake Roberts, and I am a program manager 1 with the commission and coordinator for the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta National Heritage Area. Tonight, I will be asking for commission action on additional funding for a contract with Point Heritage Development Consulting, or Point HDC, for the National Heritage Area Program and Management Plan scope of work. Last November, the commission authorized the executive director to offer, negotiate, and execute a consultant contract with Point HDC not to exceed $149,400. The original scope included preparation of a workload analysis, project charters, vision statement, and project plans for each component of the NHA management plan. Point HDC began their work in early March. It soon became clear that the amendments to the contract scope of work were necessary for a couple of reasons. One, the pandemic has affected state agency budgets, staff availability to manage outreach and prepare sections of the management plan in-house, and our ability to conduct public outreach in person. Second, we now have a more concrete public outreach strategy, which includes the creation of the NHA Advisory Committee that Eric just spoke about, and 4 task groups. The amendments include Point HDC assisting commission staff with management of the NHA Advisory Committee and task group meetings, and preparing sections of the management plan. Commission staff are recommending a contract amendment that would not exceed $25,000 for a total contract amount not to exceed $174,400. Thank you for your time. We appreciate your consideration of the contract amendment.
Right. So that concludes the presentation?
Yes.
All right, very good. So let's see, are there any comments by any members of the commission before we take public testimony?
Oscar, this is Don.
Yeah.
Just want to say, I think at some juncture, I know Eric kind of put it forward and you may have asked a question too, but we ought to at least run through the list of those folks that are being considered for appointment as well as I get the contract items. So I think it'd be a good idea. Okay, thanks.
Yep, thank you. All right. Yeah, I was going to recommend that at the end. Okay, so any other comments by any members of the commission? If not, are there any public's requests to speak? Eric?
I'm not aware of any, Mr. Chair, but maybe I could, while people are thinking about whether they want to comment, is this an appropriate time to read the list of names?
Please, yes.
Great. So commission members, these are the 15 proposed appointees. I'll list the name and the community where they're from. Michael Campbell from Clarksburg, Lenora Clark from Discovery Bay, Barbara Daly from Clarksburg, Paulette Henham from Cortland, Matt Holmes from Stockton, Douglas Shaw from Locke, Carol Jensen from Brentwood, Janet Lake from Freeport, Gia Moreno from Hood, James Motlow from Locke, Elizabeth Patterson from Benicia, David Stewart from Sacramento, Melissa Tayaba from Sacramento, Jan Vick from Rio Vista, and Jean Yokotobe from Ileton. And those would be the voting members. In addition, Matthew Moore and Michael Moran would be ex officio members of the committee, respectively representing United Auburn Indian Community of Auburn Rancheria and East Bay Regional Parks District. And Mr. Chair, I didn't include the affiliation of all those names. I could certainly go into that, but I also remind everyone it's part of the staff report that for those joining the meeting online, it's posted on the commission website. And of course, commission members have access to that as well.
Eric, can I add in another ex officio member, which would be Trevor Rice from National Park Service, because I saw him on the line right now.
Great, I see Trevor too. Thank you for mentioning that. And Mr. Chair and commission members will endeavor to add additional ex officio members. We certainly would want to have active participation from our sister Delta agencies. There probably are other agencies as well. So those we will not propose to bring to the commission for formal appointment, but we'll report back to you as we add members to the committee in that ex officio capacity. Thank you for that, Blake.
Very good. All right. I know you guys spent a tremendous amount of time going over the applications, and thank you very much for your diligent work in creating a good composition for the next iteration of the management plan. So with that, we're looking for a motion. Director Natoli, are you interested in making that motion?
So moved, Mr. Chair.
Very good. Looking motion and looking for a second.
Second, Mr. Chair, Thompson.
All right. Thank you, Skip.
And
for that.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry for interrupting, but can we clarify, is the motion for both items or is this just for appointees to the Management Plan Advisory Committee?
Both items for the contract as well as for the appointment of the committee.
Very good.
Second concurs.
Very good. All right. So with that motion and a second, Madam Clerk, would you call the roll?
You bet. Thank you. Chair Villegas,
Yes.
Vice Chair Natoli,
Aye.
Commissioner Wynn,
Yes.
Commissioner Burgess,
Yes.
Commissioner Thompson,
Aye.
Commissioner Krieg,
Aye.
Commissioner Sandin,
Aye.
Commissioner Nakanishi,
Yes.
Commissioner Paroli,
Yes.
Commissioner Slater,
Yes.
Commissioner Agar,
Yes.
Commissioner Lester Moffitt,
Yes.
Commissioner Vogel,
Yes.
Commissioner Bush, Meeting Commissioner Bush, Chair Villegas, it looks like a motion carries by a vote of 13-0, but we have that.
Wonderful.
Have that carryover.
Very good. All right. Well, thank you for that. And congratulations and thank you to the advisory committee members for volunteering their time to better their community. So thank you for that. All right. That takes us to item 12, which is receive a report on the Economic Sustainability Plan, Recreation and Tourism Chapter Update, and consider some recommendations. And I believe, Virginia, that's your item this evening.
Yes. Eric, I didn't know, did you want to make any introductory comments or shall I launch?
No, please launch. Thank you, Virginia.
Okay. Well, good evening, Chairman Villegas and commissioners. My name is Virginia Gardiner, and I am a program manager here at the commission. And I'm really excited at last to be bringing this presentation to the commission. Go ahead and change the next slide, Stacy. To recap where the Economic Sustainability Plan is coming from, basically the legislature directs us to prepare and update the Economic Sustainability Plan. The updates are as needed. And of course, with an economic plan, you want to make sure that you have the best available data and current trends available. So this is makes it necessary to do the update. And we also want to make sure that we have database recommendations to be able to develop effective responses to the key issues and trends that we're seeing. Next slide. So all this is in the service of our desired outcome, which is a sustainable, thriving Delta recreation and tourism economy. So recreation and tourism represents the second largest economic sector in the economy, and it's important to look at the data, key issues and trends influencing the sustainability of recommendations. And the update gives us an opportunity to listen to Delta residents and communities and be able to develop the most helpful and responsive actions out of this. Next slide. So since we published the first economic sustainability plan in 2012, we've hit various milestones, the most important and exciting of which is the Delta Heritage Area designation back in 2019. We've also done a tremendous amount with the Delta Marketing Task Force, especially the visit cadelta.com website, signage, branding, and logo, and the great Delta Trail planning, which included the Eastern Blueprint distribution to stakeholders most recently earlier this year before COVID-19 hit, and we were just starting outreach when that occurred. So we've been a bit slowed down, but next slide. We've also updated a number of studies and surveys, including the ones listed there on the screen between 2015 and 2019. Updates of recreational boating, recreation tourism survey that we completed in 2018 and reported in 2019, and then our socioeconomic indicators report. So what are the latest trends and numbers? Well, let's have the next slide, which shows some not so rosy numbers. We've had a decrease of marinas in the Delta since 2008. It's been gone down to 97 this year in 2020. Also, as you can see, recreation-related establishments have gone down, and items like boat building in the Delta, which are pretty high economic contributors. So this is why one of the reasons we list those kinds of numbers. Generally, the trends are nationwide, but since 2000, for example, within the Delta's market area, boating vessel registrations are also down. So this is something pretty significant. Next slide. And we have some better news in terms of agritourism. We've increased in the 6 Delta counties, including associated increases in income per farm. And of course, we have many wineries, wine tasting establishments, and even some distilleries that are coming online. Interestingly, I want to note that the numbers were all gathered before the pandemic effects began to kick in. But during the COVID-19 closures, we've actually heard reports of significant increases in more close to home outdoor recreation, such as boating, fishing, camping, and walking or running in parks and natural areas. Of course, there's no certainty as to whether this rediscovery of outdoor recreation will continue, but it's a bit of a silver lining, and we'll take what we can get. Next slide. So all other things being equal, it's important to note that since 2012, the population in the Delta market area has grown, while visitation has been flat over the past decade. And current direct spending in the Delta region from resource-related and right-of-way tourism-related trips and related non-trip spending is about $250 million inside the Delta in 2020 dollars, as compared to about $312 million in 2012. So this is a decline of almost 20%. Most spending occurs within legacy communities and at marinas. So let's have the next slide. see what we can dive into what the decreases are. So part of it is that we have had better data. That's always a good thing. But the more important focus is that most recreation spending currently is retail related, which lowers our economic impact multiplier. And as I mentioned, boat building, for example, has a higher economic impact than your everyday 7-Eleven. And so this is something that we needed to look at more closely. Okay, so what's the decrease? What's going wrong? Let's have the next slide. Just a little sort of graphic example of how many things are going wrong. We could go on forever, but rather than do that, next slide. We did get an earful, but what we wanted to do was really focus on the high impact areas and prioritize to keep our eyes on the prize. If our desired outcome is to sustain the second pillar of the Delta economy, recreation and tourism, then we decided we would focus on the problems with those areas that most strongly impact the Delta economy. And the long list from the previous slide, we want to focus on the higher impact solutions. Next slide. So we've reviewed the previous studies and looked at the updated numbers and trends. And the next slide includes, so the list of constraints is generally facility related, water quality, information and marketing, program, boating safety, and crime and homelessness. Those items were the ones that we really focused in on because those seem to have the most effect on our highest impact economic contributors. Next slide. So the next two slides here suggest a list of high priority recommended actions that we focused on, including a lot of partnerships, and some recommendations build on or expand existing efforts. So for example, if we want to increase law enforcement funding and presence in the Delta, obviously we have existing law enforcement programs. Next slide. Some of the recommendations are new, such as instituting regular Delta recreation surveys. Also expanding the Delta Marketing Task Force efforts. Again, that's building on an existing initiative that's showing a lot of promise, but needs more support. Additionally, developing permit and planning assistance for legacy community small businesses would be something new that would be, would take some consideration of how to accomplish that. Next slide. So importantly, we found that the recommendations from the 2012 Economic Sustainability Plan for Recreation and Tourism held up very well over the years. Most of what has changed has been that additional constraints have piled on, like that slide we showed you of all the problems, and the economic trends are kind of heading downwards. So we'd like to focus our efforts on building a collaborative, this strategic action listed on this slide, of local, state, and private NGO organizations to join together and advance a priority recreation and tourism agenda that would be by and for the Delta. Next slide. So here are some questions we'd like to have you consider, and if you have feedback now as we move into our public outreach efforts, we'd really appreciate your thoughts. We would like to know for sure if you support the strategic approach. Our proposed outreach is going to be to the entities you see on the slide here, local parks and recreation folks, the Delta Marketing Task Force. We've already presented to our Delta as Place Interagency Working Group, and had some interest from the local counties. And we would also, you'll perhaps hear from Mark Pruner in a moment about our presentation to the Delta Protection Advisory Committee. But we'd also like to know if there are specific organizations or entities that you would like us to reach out to. And with that, my presentation is complete and ready for questions.
Okay, thank you, Virginia, for that. Are there any questions or thoughts about the recommended or suggestions, including the questions that Virginia has posed?
Barbara Daly is trying to join. We could give her a second. I'm going to look and see if possibly they need to an unmute.
Okay, so, well, yeah, so we'll take commission comments first, and then we'll do public comment in the interim. So are there any commission members that have any thoughts about what has been asked of us at this juncture?
Oscar, this is Don.
Yeah.
Just a question, and maybe it'll be background to some of the ongoing work here on the plan. But if recollection serves me right, when the 2009 Delta Reform Act was put into place, in that statute, they call for a Delta Investment Fund. I don't recall specifically whether there was direction around how that might be utilized and whose discretion that would fall. But I do think that as we look at kind of a changing landscape, certainly with both the pluses and minuses that Virginia has gone through here relative to what's happened over the last 8 or 10 years, I think, again, not that certainly that's going to be the sole source for any future initiatives, but to my recollection, that there hasn't been any dollars allocated to that particular fund, and I know we've certainly had a good fortune having our legislative representatives to serve on the commission. But I think that might be something as we continue to go forward with the economic sustainability plan is both what can be done certainly in the private sector and support of the public sector on permitting, taking on issues like invasives in the waterways and so forth. But also, I think just what we've seen more broadly in the pandemic, this impact, and some of it very lasting to the business operations and business climate. And again, I think, some of the things have been pointed out here as it relates to recreation that certainly were pre-pandemic in some cases. But I would, I guess, like us as at the end of all this, to at least include some discussion as to how that might be, and then have some discussion about how that message might at least get forwarded to the appropriate folks and really call for some investment beyond some of the Bond Act monies that's come through the Conservancy, some of the initiatives have been funded through the Commission and certainly legislative appropriations. But I think that Delta Investment Fund, that shouldn't get lost. That was called for nearly more than 10, almost 11 years ago now, and I think that it'd be important at some point in time that if there's going to be some strategic approach, that some of that investment come from potentially from that funding source. So I just put that up there as a thought as we move forward on this project. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other thoughts or comments before we take public testimony, and we'll bring that back. All right, hearing none, was Barbara able to get back on or get on to begin with? And do we have any other public testimony?
No, she won't be able to ask questions. And
all right,
no question for this item. Thank you.
Okay, very good. So there's no public testimony then? Okay.
There's no hands raised.
Very good. All right, so return it back. I like what you're saying, Don. That to me that makes sense. I think it's indicative of why staff has indicated that the number of marinas have gone down. Frankly, from my own experience, and it's limited in scope, I know for a fact it's a struggle to maintain a business on the water side. And so I think the idea of looking into how we might be able to be helpful in the permitting process as it relates to the leveraging of the Delta Investment Fund from 2009 makes all the sense in the world. And so I would concur with your recommendation that we explore that in addition to the staff's recommendations. That makes good sense.
Well, thanks, and good, of course, it has to be, I don't think there's ever been a dollar put into it yet, but, you know, that doesn't, at least there's a place marker there, and I'm sure we could find somebody to hold the account if we could get some appropriation. So anyway, just a thought, but no, thanks for your comments too. Yeah.
Absolutely. Any other thoughts about that suggestion or any other comments or recommendations? Okay, so Virginia, does that get you what you need at this juncture?
Yes, thank you. And I'll just mention that next steps are that we will be starting the public outreach around the Delta. And if any of the commissioners have specific local organizations or entities or staff for the counties or cities that they'd like to direct us to, please feel free. My email is easily accessible, was on the previous slide, but also you can reach me through Eric. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And I know this last year has been almost unprecedented in terms of the different business sectors trying to survive, let alone in the Delta where it's a challenge to itself. So I'd imagine, I'm hoping that next year might be something different, and then we can really take off in terms of figuring out what businesses need and how we can be helpful to them. So thank you for your work on that. Okay, that's item 12. Item 13 is the Delta Protection Advisory Committee report, and I believe Mark Pruner has joined us. Is that right?
Yeah, he is here, Mr. Chair. I don't know if he needs to be unmuted or if he just needs to unmute himself.
He appears to have the ability to unmute himself, so.
Okay, there I am. Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members of the commission. I just, if I can, just piggyback on what Virginia said. She came and gave us an update at our last DPAC meeting a couple weeks ago, and I think I speak for everybody when I say that Virginia did a great job of giving us not just a report of here's what's been done, here's what we're thinking. What do you guys think? But it was a little bit more information, and so we got a chance to weigh in at a more foundational level on a really important project that the commission engages in. So I want to thank Virginia, Eric, for making that happen, and we look forward very much to being value added in that process, especially hearing about the metrics and making the plan even better, kind of version 2, following through not just with a reporting of general numbers, but kind of really drilling down into what it's going to take to make the Delta better in terms of tourism and economy. I'm not following my list, but that's we just heard Virginia. What we heard also at our meeting is we got an update from the Stakeholder Engagement Committee that is intersecting with the water contractors. 2 big pieces of information came out of that update that I wanted to pass on. Number one, the contractors are saying that in December, they think they're going to roll out a proposed community benefit agreement, which, as I understand it, in general terms, will involve a large amount of funding that will be contributed toward mitigation and improvement in the Delta to offset the damage that they're now admitting and more freely admitting they're going to cause. My personal opinion is that if and when that comes, I say if and when because it's been rumored to be coming for a while, that'll ignite a whole string of discussions that'll be have to be dealt with, I think, over time. Number 2 is the SEC, the Stakeholder Engagement Committee, finally opened up to allow a person from Hood, Gia, and sorry I don't have her last name. She's a 5th generation resident of Hood. I know Gia, she's a great contributor. And Hood is I think as we all know, one of the key epicenters of the project. And I think it's fair to say the most at-risk community, certainly the most at-risk legacy community because of the single tunnel project. So they now have a more direct voice on that stakeholder engagement committee. In addition to Virginia's report, we had a chance to talk to Lisa, and that was very productive. Lisa gave us some pretty cool graphics analyzing the update on the strategic plan and some of her ideas to focus on regional issues, incorporate metrics more, and not only what's happened in the past, measuring how the last version of the strategic plan had an impact, but use that data to go forward. And I think we were able to have a good discussion with her and look forward to discussions more in the future. One thing I know that I would like to do on the advisory committee in terms of structure is at our January meeting, discuss having more regularized meetings, much like the commission does. The commission plans meetings in a year out. I'd like to kind of follow that and plan meetings out a whole year. Because we've had some really good participation. I mean, Zoom has allowed us to reach out to a lot more people. Our last meeting, we had a good number of folks that we normally don't see participate and weigh in. So notwithstanding the host of negatives from COVID, there is that one kind of shining light that I did want to share. That concludes my report, Mr. Chair. I'm happy to entertain questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Mark, for your ongoing work. And are there any questions or comments of Mark's report? Hearing none, seeing none. Any public comment on this item 13?
No hands raised currently.
No hands raised. Okay, very good. Well, thank you, Mark, again for your continued great work, and thank you for joining us this evening and providing us the update.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, very good. Thank you. All right, that takes care of item 13. So item 14 is receive the report on the DWR Prop 1 Delta Levees funding and consider approval of letter to Delta legislators. Let's see, Eric, so are you gonna, yes, you will introduce this item.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. And before I jump into this, you know, one of the great things about these Zoom meetings is that you attract participants from far and wide. And I did notice that founding executive director Margaret Aramburu joined our meeting. And Margaret, welcome. And you can't stay away from the Delta. It's just gets in your blood. So I'm glad you're joining us this evening. So Mr. Chair and commission members, just a little background first. Proposition 1, as you may recall, was a measure that was placed on the statewide ballot in November of 2014 via legislative action. And in addition to funding a lot of other things, Proposition 1 provided $295 million to, as the legislative analyst described it in analyzing Prop 1 for the official voter information guide, improve levees or respond to flood emergencies in the Delta. And there are probably, perhaps Assemblyman Frazier was recollecting at the time that was put together, but that whole proposition was pretty hard fought as it made its way through the legislature. And this funding for Delta, improving flood protection in the Delta region was pretty integral to ensuring that the proposition could receive the necessary votes to clear the legislature and make its way to the ballot. So specifically, Water Code Section 79781, which is provided in the staff report, is the section of Proposition 1 that directed this $295 million to improve levees or respond to flood emergencies in the Delta. And specifically, what that Water Code section called out were 4 things. local assistance under the Delta Levee Maintenance Subvention Program, which is familiar to many throughout the Delta region. Funding for special flood protection projects, or what we call DWR special projects, a program administered by Department of Water Resources that funds improvement of Delta levees. Levee improvement projects that increase the resiliency of levees within the Delta to withstand earthquake, flooding, or sea level rise, and then emergency response and repair projects. So fast forward to the future, a forum that a number of us engage in on a regular basis is the Delta Levees and Habitat Advisory Committee. This is a group that meets monthly. DWR has significant participation in that committee. And Steve Rothert, who you're going to be hearing from following me, shared information with the group about the allocation of funding from Water Code Section 79781, that pot of money that was in Proposition 1 for improving Delta levees. And what concerned a number of people, and what certainly concerned me, was that of the almost 148 million dollars that's been appropriated to date from that part of Proposition 1, $50 million was directed to projects that either have what many consider to be minimal flood control benefit, or in the case of one project, flood benefits that are still to be determined. And these projects are generally located in the Yolo Bypass region. What's called Fix in Place for the Yolo Bypass is one. Lookout Slough, located in Solano County, is the second. And Little Egbert, a project in development, also located in Solano County, is the third. The reason I'm bringing this to the commission today is that based on conversations I've had with the Delta Levee community, I wasn't in the room when Proposition 1 was negotiated, but I've heard from people who were in the room that this funding was really integral to ensuring that Delta legislators in particular could get behind that proposition. There was strong concern at the time that the proposition would somehow facilitate the development of what was then the Twin Tunnel project, of course, what today is the Delta Conveyance Project. And then, and so out of concern over, in essence, reserving that funding for broad scale flood improvement in the Delta region, I'm bringing this matter to you today, and attached to this agenda item is a proposed letter to the Legislative Delta Caucus, co-chaired by Assemblyman Frazier and Senator Dodd, that would lay out the information that's included in the staff report, express the concern over the DWR appropriations to date from the Prop 1 Delta Levee funding pot, and would suggest that the legislature look more deeply into this, whether through efforts of legislative staff, or whether asking the legislative analyst or even the auditor to take a closer look at that. I should say that these three projects I mentioned, and the commission has commented on Lookout Slough. Many members joining this committee, commission meeting, are familiar with that project. In no way am I trying to say that these projects are not appropriate or are not good projects. They probably are pretty good restoration projects, but I don't believe that they really pass the mark as projects that improve flood protection in the Delta, as was so clearly the intention behind Water Code Section 79781. And so that's why I'm asking for this action today. And if I could, Mr. Chair, I would like to give an opportunity for Steve Rothert to present to you all. He shared with me today some slides that we'd like to pull up on the screen. I think it will help him present the information to you. I do want to express my appreciation to Steve and to Robert Charney, both of DWR, for their engagement on this and really for sharing the information in the first place. But I'm sorry that I still, even though I appreciate that they shared the information, I'm still very concerned about the information they shared, and would think it's important that this commission do what it can to ensure that that Prop 1 money, that very limited pot of Prop 1 money that's intended for Delta levies, really be directed toward its intended purpose in the future. So with that as a background, and with that as an introduction, Steve Rothert is the chief of the Division of Multi-Benefit Initiatives at the Department of Water Resources, and I'd like to turn it over to him.
Thank you, Eric.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Villegas, and good evening to you, Chair Villegas, and other commission members. I really the opportunity to ask you tonight this topic. I do have a few slides, but I also recommend that I and this conversation is standing between you and dinner, so I was as quick as possible. So I really want to thank Eric for bringing his concerns to Robert and me and others at DWR over a month ago, and for providing this opportunity to address you. I've been in this position as chief of the Division of Multi-Benefit Initiatives for only about 6 months, 5 months really. So I'm still learning on the job, and therefore I'm grateful that Robert Charney, who's the chief of the Delta Levee Systems Integrity Branch, is here to help answer any questions. So as I understand the letter that Eric has drafted, I hear two concerns. One, and he's just mentioned them. One is that the Prop 1 funds have been allocated to 3 projects, the Gut Slough, Little Egbert, and the Yolo Bypass Fix in Place. And those projects, in his view, don't provide appropriate or adequate flood protection to qualify. And the second concern I see in the letter is that the funding is being used to help offset the costs of mitigation for the State Water Project. And so in this presentation, I'd like to address those two things for each of those projects. And just as you know, these projects are all in the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan developed in 2017, which is DWR's, and particularly my division and related divisions, our guiding document that tries to strategically prioritize projects that will benefit, that will provide multiple benefits to California throughout the Central Valley, and with a particular focus in the Delta.
Hey, Steve, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but, and maybe it is just me, but there were a few times where your voice got a little choppy, and I'm wondering if maybe just, turning off your video might reserve your bandwidth. Maybe it's just me, but if others experience the same thing, I just want to make sure that you're heard loud and clear.
Thank you. I'll do that now. I hope that helps. So let's see. So all of these projects are included in the flood protection plan because they provide, they improve flood protection either through setting levees back, raising levees, or improving levees to current standards, or a combination of all of those things. And so that's sort of the general context in which we're talking about these projects. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So you've seen this language, and that language is in the letter that Eric developed. I just want to call attention to section 79781C, which focuses on the type of project, levee improvement projects, that can increase the resiliency of levees within the Delta to those threats. And so we're not just talking about subventions and special projects and emergency responses, but also other projects that serve the overall intent of the proposition. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So this table is some of the information that we provided at the request of Erik and others to the Delta Levees Habitat Advisory Committee, the DLHAC committee, back in September, I believe. And I just wanted to point out two things. One is the $50 million in system-wide flood risk reduction costs you see up, and also the total remaining funds in this section 7781 that's listed here is $199 million. But as you might know, or probably know, that the Budget Bill Junior, as I understand it's called, was passed in October, and it advanced $53 million from future years to this coming fiscal year. So the actual remaining dollars is somewhere closer to $140 million. Next, next, please. So this is just a simpler way to look at it. And again, the numbers need to be adjusted downward by $53 million. But you can see the breakout of the funding more easily that way. And just so you know, so Lookouts, of the $50 million, Lookout SLU got 21.9 million, Little Egbert got 12.1, and the Fix in Place project is allocated 16 million. But I want to be clear that there are no contracts that have been entered into for the Little Egbert project or any of the to be determined Fix in Place projects. And of the $53 million that's being advanced through the Budget Bill Junior, 42 million of that will go to the Delta Levees special projects and 10 million to subventions. So next slide, please. So just to orient ourselves, in case you don't know every inch of the Delta, I always find it useful. Lookout SLU there and Little Egbert there, both at the bottom end of the YOLO bypass, and I'll show the location of the Fix in Place projects later. So next slide. So the Lookout SLU project has been analyzed and sort of optimized for flood management, given the multiple benefit charge of the entire project. And the analysis that's been done suggests that there should be a reduction of flood stage of approximately 5 feet in the blue portion of that figure there, which is sort of the, above Little Egbert, and then less than half of a foot in the yellow area. The increased flood conveyance and storage in the YOLO bypass will also see a 40,000 acre foot increase. The project would replace 6 miles of deficient levees with modern engineered levees that meet appropriate standards. And in the analysis here, in the planning and design, we've used the higher 100-year flood elevation and which adds a foot for sea level rise. And so we have a resulting 6 foot of freeboard. So that's sort of the flood perspective, flood aspect of this project. Regarding the concern that these funds and this project are supporting the mitigation requirements of the State Water Project, it's important to note that out of the total project cost of 120 million, 22 million is coming from Prop 1, Section 79781, the one that we're talking about. And the remaining portion of the total cost of 97 million comes from the State Water Project. And we have in this project 2 separate contracts to ensure that the Prop 1, 79781 money is directed to the exclusively flood components of the project, and another contract that is from the State Water Project funds supporting the habitat related elements of the project. And it's also important to note that in order to create and maintain the habitat acres in Lookout SLU, the levee had to be set back and improved and modernized. And so the $22 million that's piggybacking on top of the 97 is actually, we consider a good investment because much of the flood reduction benefits are coming from the habitat elements of the project and not exclusively the flood elements of the project. So if we had wanted to do this project by ourselves or fully with Prop 1 funding, the cost would have been 3 to 5 times greater than what the current cost is of about 22 million. Next slide, please. So the Little Egbert project, this table that you are seeing, and maybe Robert is wanting to jump in. Let me pause, Robert, if you have something to interject now.
I did not, Steve. I just accidentally muted myself and I was asked. So I'm trying to work out the technology. Thank you for the opportunity.
Okay, good to know you're there. So this table shows the modeled production benefits of the Little Egbert project, which I should say is still in the early stages. Only feasibility studies and alternative analysis have been completed to date. And there are 2 preferred alternatives among the 15 that have been evaluated to date. And each provides almost 2 feet of flood stage reduction in a 10-year event in the Cache Slough area. And both alternatives provide an approximate 0.3 foot stage reduction in a 200-year event, the Cache Slough. And so if we could next slide, this map showing the expected flood benefits in a 25-year storm or flood event. So sort of an intermediate between the numbers that I was showing before. And you can see it ranges, up to nearly 2 feet in a number of areas. It's not the same places as high in areas. I won't see much at all, but there are important improvements according to what's been done, and has been additional modeling that's been done that has not been published yet. And that modeling suggests the improvements will be even better, but we're not showing them here because they're not fully UAQC'd and released. So if we go to the next slide, just to orient ourselves quickly, that's of course, the Yolo bypass. And if you could go to the next slide, which zooms into the lower part of the Yolo bypass. My screen is showing. Are you folks seeing the fix in place slide with the red circle?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, great. So that's I'm just circling because it's so hard to see. Try to stretch your eyes and read but what I wanted to point out, the pink shaded levees there that are both on the west side and the east side of the Yolo bypass are the areas, the reaches of levee that could receive some of the fix in place funding to fix those in place, bring them up to standard and other good things. So next slide, please. So I'm just wanted to quickly bring us back to this table and discuss sort of going forward. As you know, we can't discuss the details of budget proposals that we've made for the next budget, but we expect the budget that comes out on January 10th, just I guess a little less than 2 months from now, will reflect DWR's understanding and appreciation that a healthy and protected Delta is a high priority for California because of its communities, its agricultural industry, recreation resources, infrastructure, and water supply reliability, among other things, as a place to live. And so with that, if we could go to the next one, and the last one. So I would just say that another option to consider, in addition to the letter and the action that is proposed in the letter, is that instead of seeking the legislature's action, which could take a very long time and not be a very accessible process, if you will, we could establish an open and fully transparent process between the Commission and DWR that could begin essentially immediately, that we could use to answer any questions and concerns. And I would just say that I think that I've demonstrated through all of my actions in my new position that I'm a public servant committed to transparency and collaboration. And we could set up a process whereby the Commission and staff could request any information you're in at a later Commission meeting, or if you have workshops, we could comes out, so we're dealing with that. We would be happy to engage in this exchange until you have exhausted your questions and expressions of concern, and then see where we are after that. So with that, if there are any questions, Robert and I would be happy to answer them.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. First of all, thank you very much for taking the time this evening. Congratulations on making it through 6 months of your position, and again, thank you for coming this evening. I for one certainly appreciate your willingness, as you said, to be open and transparent and help us identify questions that we have as they relate to the whole range of funding options that are discussed here this evening. So I'm very interested in discussing further what I think you've put on the table, but I want to turn to my colleagues to see whether or not there are initial questions or comments regarding what we've heard in the last 20 minutes or so. Are there any comments or questions by any members of the Commission?
Mr. Chair, this is Commissioner Thompson.
Yes, sir.
I never thought I would be defending DWR, but I think I will.
You're getting soft.
At the end of my term, that may be part of the crazy. But I have a little familiarity with Lookout Slough, and I think Lookout Slough is one of those projects that has the ecosystem restoration benefits as well as flood benefits. And I say this because as I remember and watching this Lookout Slough, and the County of Solano and DWR didn't agree on Lookout Slough, and we've kind of worked through those issues. And I think Chris Trinnell and Mike Roberts did a wonderful job of setting aside some of the concerns and working with the county. Having said that, this is one of those dual benefit projects, in my opinion, where they took this levee that was, I'll put it in layman's terms, in trouble because of it was starting to break down, and they're moving it, allowing flooding to occur in this large area, thus relieving some of the pressure further down city of Rio Vista. And so, I do think that and I'm looking forward to this new budget that you mentioned in January, because I think there's twofold. The problem's twofold. One is I don't think the state has paid attention to the levee system, and attention, I mean by providing the funds necessary to maintain it. And we argued about whether or not this was a conveyance project instead of the dual tunnels. And, that's water under the bridge, if I can use that term. But I think that this letter is premature. I think the offer to work with the Commission on some of the issues that may have some concern to members of this body can be addressed at this level. And I do think that the state has recognized that the Delta is an important part of this whole ecosystem water conveyance project. But I'd like to just finalize my comment to say that, a lot of the costs that are being paid by the taxpayers really ought to be considered strongly to start being looked at by those south of the Delta that benefit but impact the Delta with their water projects. So, the water contractors in the southern part of the state need to be made aware, if they already aren't, that their impacts are costly and that they need to pay for these impacts of the Delta. But I don't think right now, Mr. Chair, the letter is appropriate. I think it ought to be sent back to staff to be worked on. And in the meantime, I think we ought to take Steve up on his offer to have him come back, talk about some of the issues that are concerning to the commission. So those are my nickels worth.
This is Commissioner Burgess. Don, were you going to talk?
No, the floor is yours. Jump on in.
I thought I saw Don light up. There is a very limited amount of funding for our Delta levees. And so I know we're very protective of that funding, and we're going to be very scrutinizing everything that's happening. And, I've seen studies from DWR that has proven that the more we invest in our levees, the less they fail. And so I don't want to see things go the other way. And so I'm still interested in hearing a little bit more from our flood experts, but I do want to make sure that we are protecting our levees while there's other activities going on to protect other water resources. We need to protect ours as well.
Mr. Chair, this is Don Tolley.
Absolutely. Jump in, Don.
Yeah, and maybe just coming on comments both by Skip and Diane, or Commissioners Burgess and Thompson. I wanted to, because it's in the letter, and I know Steve touched on it, but it goes to heart of some of the concerns that, having been a part of some of those discussions as one of the supervisors on the Prop 1, as Skip was, and I know others as well, that, multi-benefit, and I get that can be characterized in different fashions, but in this letter, in the draft letter, and I might turn to Eric and certainly give Steve the opportunity too, but, in that next to the last paragraph in this draft letter, that, there are concerns that these multi-benefit projects are satisfying obligations under the biological opinions for the continued operation of Delta water exports. And I think, the second sentence was, this in this draft, that this is an inappropriate use of state general obligation bonds and is a responsibility that should be provided solely by Delta water exporters. And, we've had this conversation certainly at the commission level, but at the county level and in other forums about, who the beneficiaries are, but also then, who pays. And, state bond monies, to Diane's point, are, precious dollars backed by the good faith of all of us as Californians, and certainly, having multiple benefits. But, this is a limited pot of money. And again, I'm not certainly challenge any of the projects. Certainly, I appreciate Skip's work and his board of supervisors on Lookout Slough and that of DWR. But I guess I'd like to probe that a little more deeply, because that to me goes to the heart of certainly concern that I would have about use of dollars in, that folks who, move the water and use the water and for uses particularly south of the Delta, and whether it be for farming or for municipal and industrial uses, that, somehow that their obligations get met through precious bond dollars that really need to go for not just flood and levee improvements, but for those things that they were intended, and not to somehow around the edges, cover things that they are obligated to, but should have done and must do. And so I guess I'd just like to maybe, Eric, have you, from your, again, you have a strong base of knowledge, and certainly, again, Steve, your work with DWR, even though it may have been only in the last 5 months in this section, I think, to me, that's a real important point. I think certainly for us as commissioners, but also for our legislative caucus and delegation, who, again, were, as representatives, certainly part of those discussions about Prop 1, and it went to the heart of whether some of us could even support it from our county perspectives, because concern about how this money might go to support conveyance or not, but secondly, that, to really have that investment in the Delta for, in particular, levees and flood protection, and not to satisfy somebody else's obligations, even if it's done indirectly. So I guess I'd like to hear a little more behind that, if I could.
Sure, and I thank you, Vice Chair Natoli. I'll turn my video off in case it's interfering with a clear communication. So as I was mentioning in my comments, this was and continues to be an important issue for DWR that we focus a lot of attention on to bifurcate the interests and mitigation obligations and concerns of the State Water Project from the flood and other benefits that the flood side of the DWR house, if you will, is delivering. And so in this case, there are two separate contracts, as I mentioned, to ensure that those two streams of funding are separate and clearly going towards the either the habitat from the state water contractors and the State Water Project to meet their mitigation obligations, and then the Prop 1 79781 money going to the flood component of the project. And so I wasn't here at this time, and I'm not sure Robert was engaged in the development of this project either directly, but my understanding is that there was a lot of discussion, in fact, negotiation between DWR and the flood side of the house with the state water contractors about who was going to pay for what. And they were very clear that they didn't want to pay a penny above what was necessary for them to get the habitat out of the project that they needed for mitigation. And they were very careful and dogged about ensuring that the additional work on the levees, bringing them up to code and setting them back and all of that were covered by the 18% of the total budget. So there's an 18%, 82% relationship between the State Water Project and State Water Contractors funding and the flood side and Prop 1 in this case funding for this project. And I know from conversations with my staff about the history of this project and how it was developed, we have been very careful about holding the line on the 18%, and the State Water Project side of DWR has been very careful about holding the line on going not a penny above the 82%. So that's the way I understand it, and those are the safeguards that DWR put in place to really address this concern that you expressed, Vice Chair Natoli, and I totally share that concern because the beneficiary of that work and that component of the project needs to pay, and the flood benefits are appropriately paid by other sources.
Steve, does that hold true for, and you mentioned there's the fix in place, and obviously Little Egbert's the proposal, and obviously the Lookout Slough. So is that formula hold in place everywhere, or is it just on the one project?
Well, there have been a number of projects that have been developed and implemented outside of the bypass that have and will continue to deliver new mitigation acres. And I believe that sort of relationship has been established. I don't know if it's 18% or some other way to divide the funds. And I think in some cases it's all State Water Project funding. In the case of Little Egbert, as I mentioned, we're at the very beginning stages of that planning process. In fact, the RDs that make up the Little Egbert project footprint, if you will, just formed JPA, I believe in October, and had their first official meeting as a JPA about a week ago, where they were addressing very sort of startup sorts of issues. And so we haven't, that project has not progressed beyond sort of conceptual alternatives analysis phase. But with this project, as with the others, we will be very careful and very committed to ensuring that that any prop funds that go to it are serving the intended purpose, achieving the intended purpose of the proposition as Eric and others have talked about.
Well, thanks, man. I just want to say, I know we were afforded the opportunity here a few weeks ago to actually, meet with some of the folks and to, actually do a physical visit to Little Egbert and appreciate that opportunity. That was certainly informative for me and I think for others that were on that. Could I just, Mr. Chair, just ask Eric, any response? Because again, obviously you've been in some of these conversations and I appreciate, the work that you've done and certainly Steve's response on this, but on this kind of formulaic background for expenditure of the Prop 1 monies and how that is divided out in, I guess, a firewall put forward relative to obligations by, here the paragraph mentions Delta water exporters, but maybe others as well. But I'm just curious, Eric, any other thoughts on your part?
I guess my main thought is that I'd sure like to see the analysis that arrived at those numbers. It still feels to me like these contributions to these projects relative to the flood benefit that they're receiving, that they provide, is disproportionate. If you had $1 million to spend in the Delta, is that where you'd put the money first? So I think if there is some kind of analysis that could indicate, I'm frankly a little skeptical that there was a real good analysis that separated out the state water project responsibility from the flood component. But, I think really what we should be asking, and maybe our reclamation district folks that I'm guessing will want to comment on this at some point, either commissioners or others joining the meeting as public comment, might want to talk about that. But I'd welcome any kind of an analysis that shows, here's how we arrived at that this amount devoted to this project is a good expenditure. But yeah, I'm super skeptical that $22 million for Lookout Slough is, we could get a heck of a lot of flood protection in the Delta with that money, applying it elsewhere.
Okay, well, that's a good point. If I could just add, perhaps that's part of the question that needs to be embodied in the letter. Let's see the analysis and let us, again, those are more expert in this far more than I am, but take a look at that and to kind of do our own assessment for whatever that's worth. I think it's worth, quite a bit in this conversation. That's all I have to say right now. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Of course, thank you.
Mr.
All right.
Mr. Chairman, can I chime in just a minute?
Absolutely, jump in.
I don't want to lose sight of the fact that the issue here isn't whether those projects are good projects or not. That's for another debate. The problem that we see, and I represent the north part of the Delta for you gentlemen from DWR, is that I was around when that proposition was passed. No way in hell was it designed to go to projects like that, whether they're good or not. I'm not going to chastise that. $50 million to this Delta, you know what that would do? We spend $150 grand a year on subvention work, and we are grateful for every dollar we get. Wonderful program that needs to be extended for life. But you add a few $million to that Delta, we accomplish a lot. And so when we see what money going for something that is worthy, but when we voted for it to specifically come here, and I'm not going to say there was any illegal appropriation, I'm not going that far, but I do think a letter of some sort, arguing here with Mr. Thompson for a minute, that sorts all that out. Will this continue happening? We're not asking you to get that money back. We may if it was misappropriated. But my gosh, if it's for levee protection and flood control, what do you think these reclamation districts thought that money was going to go to? Us. And we are waiting and waiting and waiting. Like I said, we're a major borrower or user of the subvention program. And that's just 150 grand. Give me $1 million. We've got levees that none of these things that we discussed today happen without flood protection, and it is regularly overlooked. I don't mean to point that all at you, but that's where this needs further, I don't want to say investigation, but oversight from the legislature who put that in the statute. Am I portraying it correctly in their opinion? I do think it needs to go to that next level. perhaps you can reword the letter. I didn't see anything that was horribly wrong with that, but I think it's a legislative matter of where that funding should go. And I would be remiss if I didn't relay that on behalf of all my friends in the Delta. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.
Are
Chair,
there-
if I could respond.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
Thank you. Just turning off for clarity. Thank you, Commissioner Slater, for those comments and the suggestion earlier to better understand how the department developed the 82-18 split. I'm not familiar with that process. It happened years ago, but I and my staff would be happy to gather whatever information that would be responsive to that question to better inform your decision. So that's a standing offer, regardless of what goes forward. But we could get that information to you, within a matter of a few weeks.
Excuse me, thank you, Steve. The problem I see with that is the person that's spending the money, if you ask them to justify it, it's a lot easier to justify it than a third party or the person who had the Proposition 1 in the beginning. But I appreciate, this is an early stage of, I don't want to call it an investigation, but if it's Prop 1 money that we voted and we all thought it was supposed to go there, it looks, they made the effort to put a couple statutes in the code. If we were wrong, then we were wrong. But I don't think we were wrong. I think we thought that money was going to go somewhere else.
Right. Other commission member thoughts, comments, or questions before we take any public testimony?
Yes, if I may.
Absolutely.
Commissioner Paroli.
Yep,
I thought the letter was well done, and I don't see anything wrong with the firewall being in place that has a third party looking into where this money is being spent. I agree that we felt when Prop 1 was voted on that we would be getting the money to take care of our levees in the Delta. And I think that, again, that the firewall to protect that and having a third party to oversee it would not hurt anybody.
Okay. All right. Other thoughts or comments on it?
Nancy Vogel?
Yeah, Nancy, jump in.
Thanks, Chair Villegas. I just like to say that I don't think a letter is necessary. I think that multi-benefit projects are pretty difficult to do, but they have great benefits for taxpayers. And I would hate to see this commission take a myopic view. We're talking about one chunk of money in a larger pot of money. And it was good to hear from DWR about the flood benefits that do come with these projects. And I would also like to point out that DWR, in carrying out Prop 1, has to abide by the water code and not somebody's sense of what the bond language intended while the proposition was being negotiated. And so I think the best path forward is for continued transparency from DWR and continued accountability from this commission. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. Other thoughts or comments, and then we can have some public testimony, and then we can figure out where we head from here. Any other comments from any of the members of the commission? So if
Commissioner Wynn.
Yep.
I appreciate all the comments, certainly appreciate Steve's presentation and also the other commissioners who've weighed in. I kind of see this as two separate issues. One, obviously, is dealing with what's happened, and I would agree that there needs to be a discussion as to how we got to where we are with these two particular projects through DWR. But the other part is, I think, obviously with other monies available, it would seem to me that what we want to do is we'd want to look at a process or maybe a conversation, whatever you want to call it, for future allotments of this money, and how not just the Delta Protection Commission, but other Delta entities and agencies would have the ability to have some input in regards to how these decisions are made, because it's always more difficult after the fact to try to to correct or fix or whatever you want to call it, or investigate or analyze or audit. But I think that moving forward, I hear Steve making an offer to certainly work with us, and I think what we need to do is we need to define a process by which any future dollars that are allotted certainly go through, obviously, the Delta Protection Commission to give some input. I've got 52 reclamation districts in my county, not all in the Delta, but I will tell, as previously stated, they are desperate for funds to maintain what they currently have. So, $150,000, $200,000, $1 million, it would be like Christmas. So again, I think I don't have a problem with the letter. I would only ask maybe in the interim, maybe prior to the letter going out, which obviously we can hold until such time as we feel it's appropriate. But I think the more important thing is to have a discussion with these particular projects with Steve and obviously Eric, your staff, and I know others who I have a tremendous amount of respect for in regards to their knowledge of the law, and certainly Prop 1 could weigh in and have a discussion to at least determine, what happened and whether it was right, wrong, inappropriate, whatever would be one thing, but also at the same time develop a process for future, so we don't have these discussions. And as we move forward, DWR feels confident that they're spending those monies where we think, one, they were guaranteed or at least promised, and then secondly, that they have the biggest bang for the buck in regards to our future strength for our levies. So again, thanks, Oscar.
Thank you, Commissioner Wynn. Any other commission member comments before we take public testimony? All right, how many speakers do we have lined up under public testimony? If I could get a sense of that, it would help me.
Just a reminder, there is the raise your hand function underneath the participants list. And also if you're calling on the phone, if you press #2 to raise your hand, we can start taking comment.
Okay.
Yes, we have 3 in the queue at this point.
Okay. So what I'm going to ask is if you plan to speak, raise your hand now so we can, manage the discussion. It's harder to manage it when people start jumping in as the conversation has already ensued to try to counter some of the comments. So it would help me manage. So I see 3, I see 4. All right. Okay. So we'll go ahead and proceed with the 4 comments that are 4 hands we have raised. So I think staff's gonna have to manage I know it looks like Dante's up there first. So Dante, you want to start up? Welcome, Mr. Namalini.
Dante, you should be able to speak. I prompted you to unmute yourself. If you can unmute yourself, Dante.
And we'll use the 3-minute rule for this evening if we can. Thank you.
It doesn't look like Dante is unmuting himself. I've asked him to unmute himself.
Okay, we can circle back. So we'll just go to Melinda then. Melinda, Terry, if you want to unmute yourself, you're up first.
Okay, 3 minutes is going to be hard, so I'm going to talk really fast and hopefully I'll get a little bit extra time. But Central Valley Flood Control Association, this has actually been an ongoing 3-year discussion that started 3 years ago, where we really started asking not just DWR, but the administration, Chris Trunell, I saw he was on the meeting, about how this money was going to be spent. And as we got that chart that was shown earlier, we were quite concerned with the $50 million when it showed up. I would like to say that in June of this year, we were in a coalition letter. Solano County Water Agency, North Delta Water Agency, our association, Solano County, which I guess they did a settlement agreement since then, but RD 2060 and RD 2068. And in that letter, we actually raised quite a few flood control concerns that actually hamper our ability locally to deal with maintenance of the existing levees and evacuation and other issues. So, I mean, the project's going to convert a county road into a levee. There's some issues there. It'll be gravel instead of the existing roadway surface that's there now, which is important for, you know, access and being able to do maintenance of the levees that are there. It really does affect RD 2068's ability to, they describe it, it's they've got an operations plan in the event of a high water to outflank RD 2068 Yolo bypass levee and allowing that water to flow down RD 2098. And this is really going to alter that. It's going to also increase some of their operational costs. In addition, it removes a permanent loss of 40,000 acre feet of storage that, again, they use in flood events. So I'm not going to keep going on all the issues that are identified in this letter, but as you can tell, this project of Lookout Slough anyway actually does the opposite of what the statute is intended. And I think going back to what was said already, that's, you know, one thing. It's, you know, we would still object to it, but I think the point of the letter and the discussions we've been having at DELHAC is what's the appropriate source of that funding for this? And that's what we're saying is that this section of Prop 1 is not appropriate. There are 6 other chapters, frankly, because these are multi-benefit projects that they can pull from to fund those projects. So that's really the point, because for every dollar, and in this case, if you look at the 95 million, I guess that's been spent already, you know, more than half went to these other things that are not really going to upgrade the actual levee system that we have in the Delta. And it's really, so every dollar that was spent is a $50 million that wasn't spent on those levees. And it's important that we continue to improve these existing Delta levee systems, because if you're a non-project levee, meeting a certain standard is required to get FEMA repair funding. So we are foregoing federal dollars if we don't spend money on that. Same with the PL 8499. If you don't meet a certain standard, you're not going to get the repair funding from the Army Corps. That's what's at stake here, and why the $295 million being spent for the levee system is really so important. So again, it's really just an issue of, you know, and I think the letter did a good job of just saying, hey, okay, I think Steve said it earlier, Tom Slater said it earlier, we're not going to, you know, ask for the money back. But with all due respect to the commission, just creating some process for even you to look at funding moving forward, this is a legislative issue. And it's just asking them, look, we've gone this far down towards implementation. We've got a little over half left, or whatever, a third left, I guess, or 2/3. You know, let's look, you know, let's have them look at, you know, making sure that the money is being spent for what the voters actually intended. So I guess that's all my time, but again, we think the letter that is drafted really reflects the discussions that have occurred. It's not against the projects. It's just saying, please find other portions of Prop 1 and leave this funding so that we can make the improvements to not only maximize the flood risk reduction that we're able to do, but we're able to maximize the federal repair funding that we receive in the Delta. Thanks.
Right. Thank you, Melinda, for that. So we have.
It looks like Dante actually is unmuted himself. So,
Mr.
I
Nominee,
realized it was on the screen.
Welcome.
I thought I could do it with my phone. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
All right. 2 points. I think I would like to support what Melinda was saying, that the bond issue has $1.4 billion for habitat, and there's 295 million only for Delta levee improvement. There's 100 million for system-wide levee improvement. So the terms of the funding that should be applied to these kinds of projects, the principal purpose of the projects that we're talking about in the YOLO bypass is to satisfy the biological opinions for the operations of the State Water Project and the Central Valley Project. Now, I don't want to be mean to Steve because he's a very nice guy, but he wasn't here when we went through the trauma of whether or not local political leaders would support Proposition 1. One of the key factors was to make very clear that the $295 million would go to the critical levees in the Delta, not the bypass, but the critical levees in the internal of the Delta. The bypass is supposed to flood. It's a flood bypass project. The intent was to make sure that that money went there. The second thing that was imported into the bond is that the money should not be used to subsidize or the mitigation for the water projects. And it's even questionable whether or not any funds from the Prop 1 ought to be used to fund those projects. They should be funded by the water contractors. So I think it's critically important. We view this as a misappropriation of funds. Now, we don't want to litigate the issue unnecessarily, but it needs to be straightened out, and it can be straightened out administratively. What happened with the bond issue is Jerry Brown, our governor at the time, many of us thought he was going to renege on the commitments to our political leaders, and he did. And so he tried to put the grab on the $295 million right away. It wasn't the current governor's administration. It wasn't Steve. It wasn't any of the people we're talking to right now. But that move was made by Governor Brown, and he, in our view, did it inappropriately. So any help that you guys can avoid, we would really appreciate it, and I think a letter is a first start, but it doesn't go far enough. We have to get this straightened out, get the funding replenished back into the $295 million, and put it where it was intended to be used. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nomalini. All right, we have, I believe, Osha, are you with us? I think you need to unmute yourself.
Osha should be able to mute.
Yep.
Yeah, hi, thanks. OSHA Reserve, local agencies of the North Delta. I've also represented a lot of different RDs over the past 10 years or so. And I mean, levy is an issue that is kind of the top of everyone's list in the Delta, I think is what you're hearing. And, you know, any kind of misallocation of the very limited bond funds that were put forth as described, you know, is a really sensitive issue. And I think it's further sensitive because, you know, the main, I know, you know, it's not at issue tonight, but DWR is, you know, aggressively pursuing the Delta Tunnel project. And then one of the main talking points being used for that tunnel project is that if the levees break and if there's earthquakes, then the state water supplies would be threatened. And when I've listened to the contractor discussions just over the last week or so about whether to keep funding the tunnel planning, they've all pointed to the risk of levee failure as being a key driver, and they never talk about the option of keeping the levees up or how that might reduce the need for a tunnel or reduce the size of it or reduce the impacts on the communities that we're so concerned about. So, and the levee risk is kind of the main talk, is kind of been the primary point that those districts and DWR have been focusing on, including in a letter sent to the Resources Secretary to Santa Clara Valley Water District just this week. So there is a conflict between what we're hearing today in terms of a concern for protecting the levees and the understanding of DWR that there's multiple benefits to parties in and out of the Delta of maintaining those levees. And then also, what we've seen out in the water world, talking about the future of the state water project. So I think it's appropriate to try to get to the bottom of it and get more explanation about how the funds have been spent in the past, and then make sure that going forward, there's more clarity on this. And I'm especially concerned about funds going toward a project like Little Egbert that hasn't even been completed for environmental review yet. And I know from working on several restoration projects that there can be benefits, but there's also a lot of significant effects on and flood implications as well. So when there's a mixed bag like that, it just does not seem appropriate for use of flood money from Prop 1 that was earmarked for a different purpose. So I suggest that the commission go ahead and do the letter. I think it's respectful and asking for assistance from the appropriate parties, the legislature. And then at the same time, if there's an opportunity to move forward on an informal process that's been offered just tonight by DWR, that would also be fruitful. So I think both things can happen at once and would help get to a path forward to maintain the levees in the Delta as the legislature and the voters continue. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Osha, for that. And I believe there's one last speaker, Gilbert Cosio.
Gilbert, you should be able to mute yourself.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the commission. Gilbert Cosio, MBK Engineers. We represent about 40% of the levee districts in the Delta, mostly in the North and Central Delta. And I agree with the previous speakers from the public on the intent of the proposition and whatnot. But what I wanted to make my comments on are the fact that the program that we work with, the Delta Levee Subventions Program and the Special Projects Program, the way they were designed when they were initially legislated in 1988, it was totally different. It's a totally different paradigm from what had been done in the past. I know we're talking now about multi-benefit projects, increasing habitat. Well, that's actually built into these programs. The initial thought was to have a no net long-term loss of habitat. And then in 1996 with AB 360, it changed to an enhancement component. So we have to assure that our work every year results in more habitat. So programmatically, we've done with this new paradigm, somewhat new paradigm called multi-benefit projects intended all along. And if you go out anywhere in the Delta and you see a tree less than 30 years old, that tree's there because we backed off of our heavy maintenance. I mean, when I started working on these 37 years ago, there was a lot of scorched earth out there. And I know when we were wrestling with a funding program, that was the concern that, man, once these levee districts get more money, every tree's coming down. And it didn't happen that way because our program was put under the auspices of the Secretary of Resources, and he had his two departments of Fish and Game and Department of DWR work together to make sure that they watched each other. And then we had the Planning and Conservation League looking over our shoulder. And I think because of that, the whole culture of levee maintenance changed. We did back off on the scorched earth. And I think we have to get credit for that, yeah, we're looking for multi-benefit projects now, but this program's done it for over 30 years programmatically. And that's what's kind of missing here. That's all I have to say, but I have to make one more comment. I mean, it took a pandemic to mute Dante Nomalini. That's a big thing. I don't think anyone's ever done it, but you guys were able to do it. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you. All the slips or the hands that we have to speak on the public comment portion of this item. So I'm going to try to get my arms around this a little bit. So I've heard a lot of really good comments. I think there's a path forward. Going back to Commissioner Natoli's comments, his concerns about the biological opinions, and it's the funds being used to address issues there. I've heard the notion by several that there's a need for additional analysis. I also heard Mr. Rother indicate the prospects of, and thank goodness, at least the notion of, and he can't promise obviously until the budget's released, the governor's budget's released, but the prospects of more attention being placed in the space of levee work. And I wanted to echo what I think I've heard a couple of the speakers this evening, in addition to Tom's comments about the reclamation districts. I've heard repeatedly, I know this is a fact, that reclamation districts can take $1 and turn it into 1,000 in some cases, especially in the case of an emergency. They can mobilize so quickly. They can use these funds in ways that if you've not seen how they operate in a crisis environment, you have to see it, because it's pretty miraculous what they can do with the money. So I just wanted to underscore that notion, because I think it's incredibly important to make sure that folks recognize the value of our reclamation districts as it relates to flood protection. The flood plans, the flood risk reduction plans, there are multiple plans that are floating out there. And so it seems to me, in light of going back to about an hour ago, where Mr. Rothert indicated the notion of being a bit more transparent, doing maybe some further analysis and coming back to us with what might be sufficient information for us to make a more informed decision. I certainly don't feel like I have all that information this evening to move forward with what's being proposed. I might at some point, but I need more analysis. And I think there's consensus around the notion that we need more information. I did talk to Erik about this in terms of its time sensitivity. There isn't there isn't a timeline per se. I think the idea of getting a letter before our legislative caucus there's time for that. It doesn't have to happen this meeting or even next meeting. I think the idea was to get it before the next legislative session, in the event that there was interest in moving forward in that path. So I'm wondering, and I'll throw this out for folks to digest, that we ask Erik to work with Steve to identify more specifically how they came up with the plan that's before us today that we're discussing, and see whether or not there's a path for us to have additional conversation to determine what the next iteration or next step for us might be. But I don't think a letter with what's in here today is ready, is fully cooked. I don't think it's ready. I don't think it has enough of the answers to the questions that have been posed. So I would throw that out. I do think I see, and I'll make an exception, Mr. Chernell's got his hand up. So maybe before we take comment, unless there's some compelling reason to take more discussion by the commission, Mr. Chernell, are you with us? Can you hear us?
I am. Good evening. Okay. But I think that depending on where your suggested proposal goes here, I don't need to say anything further. I appreciate the opportunity.
Oh, okay, very good. All right, so I throw that out on the table to see kind of where it goes. So members of the commission, are there thoughts, ideas, or suggestions about how we might want to proceed this evening?
Mr. Chair, this is Commissioner Sandine.
Yep.
I appreciate your summary, and I think that what you're proposing is very wise given the discussion we've had this evening. So I would support the direction that you're proposing.
Thank you.
Here's Commissioner Tully. So you suggest we hold on the letter tonight, and in light of some of the questions that have been posed, obviously the testimony we've heard, we carry it forward on the agenda, allow for some of the information that's either been talked about, and I think one of the things that I guess I would say this too, that I think kind of going forward to Commissioner Wynn's comments and some of those from some of the public, that it's one thing to look in the rearview mirror and see what's been done thus far, but to look forward and what still remains in the funding pot and the needs in the Delta, as certainly recited by some of the reclamation district folks who are very close to it, and to your point about taking $1 and turning it into multiples for use in the flood protection and all that goes with that. So if you're suggesting we hold this over, I think even though we're running into the holiday season, that with the conversation and keeping it, I think, on the front burner, that we hold this over at least till our January, allow Erik and Steve and all the other respective parties. Obviously, we've had people who are knowledgeable from the public weigh in. Maybe hold this over for for that period of time and come back and see where we're at. Because I would just say, bottom line, I see no harm in asking others to, particularly our legislative representatives, to ask for their eyes and attention to it. But I do also respectfully understand that people have moved on a course of action they think is legitimate, but I think there's certainly some differences here. And, money going to Delta Levees is important. And so I guess I can support putting it over for, until our next meeting anyway to see, what comes of it. And then, but to carry this forward on our agenda.
Yeah, I mean, maybe underscoring the idea of the issues that have been raised. I mean, I think the biological opinions is a fair question for further analysis. I think we want to get some answers to that. I don't know if we want to, as Tom indicated earlier, debate the merits of every single proposal that comes forward. I think a broader framework or a policy framework or a position that this body takes on a broader scale would make it easier rather than, night after night debating the merits of each and every project. I don't think anybody's suggesting that, but I think we want to avoid getting down that path. That's going to make it, that's going to make our work and staff's work exponentially more complicated. So are there others that have thoughts on what I think Dawn is maybe alluding to as well?
Oh, Commissioner Slater, I'll talk after you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's just a letter. This isn't an argument or any. I don't know that prolonging it to the next month will do anything. I'm okay with that. Don made some good points, but Mr. Nomalini touched on something that's very important in the historical end of this. We do know what Prop 1 was in 2014. That's the standard we need to be held accountable for. The statute is there. It is written there. It may be interpreted differently by someone else, but if this Delta Protection Commission cannot stand up and protect the Delta within the parameters of all those levees, I think we're failing miserably. And I don't just say that because I live here and work here. It's what we're supposed to do. There's no anger at DWR. It just needs to be focused, and I don't see another way through that, despite Steve's offer of discussing things with us until the legislature gets involved. But I can see that in another day, and I'm happy to stick with it, if you will, if we don't take a vote today. As commissioner, I'm okay with that, Oscar.
Yeah, and to your point, Tom, maybe the analysis, and I guess maybe I want to underscore again, the analysis needs to bring back how it is that DWR concluded that this helps the levees in the Delta. I mean, I think if there's some plausible path there, we may not like it, we may not like the degree of it, but at least we'll see what that path looks like. And then we can decide, hey, we're not comfortable with it, or we are, or something else. But I would like the analysis that comes back in January, provide us some additional details on how is it that somebody concluded that this pot of money made sense for this project. And then we back out whether or not we want to debate the merits of that project or whether we want to stick to a broader conversation about, does this meet the intent of the legislation? Because I too was part of that conversation in 2014, and Dante's absolutely right. There was a lot of discussion 24 hours a day that final weekend of the session to determine whether or not there was going to be local support for this project if we weren't going to be able to get more money for levees funding in the Delta. I distinctly remember those conversations because I was part of that. So I do think it's incredibly important that we get some clarity around the path for how we got to where we are this evening, or whether or not there's other pots of money that would be more conducive to doing the work that we're debating tonight. So,
Darby, I guess I'm willing to pause on the letter as well. Yeah. I have great faith that Steve can work with Eric to talk about and get the answers that we're asking for. As long as time is not of the essence, and that the timing of this letter, a little later would maybe impact things, I'm willing to pause on it and have it come back to us in January as well.
All right. Any other thoughts or comments? If not, that'll be staff's. We don't need to take a vote on this necessarily. Eric, is staff direction given what the conversation sufficient?
Yeah, I certainly hear you all loud and clear. And our meetings in January, the governor's budget comes out January 10th. The legislature subsequent to that moves through their budget review process. So we can discuss this again on January 21st and not be hobbling ourselves in terms of, trying to affect the legislature's review of the fiscal year 21-22 budget.
Perfect. Okay. Right. So that'll be the direction to staff, unless there are any other comments. Okay. Seeing none, that is item 14. And then we have so that takes care of item 14. We have a special presentation to outgoing commission member Skip Thompson. Skip, you're still with us, right?
I am, Chair.
All right. All right. So I'll just, Eric, did you want me to just kind of start off a little bit here with what we talked about, or did you have something you wanted to say first?
No, I don't. I'm just going to hold up while you talk.
All right. Very good. All right. So for those who don't know, I'm going to just read something here because it was, it took me back a little bit. So for those who aren't aware, Skip was a founding commission member in 1993. He's served as a Solano County supervisor. He served in 1993 to 2003, and then again in 2013 to present day. During those years, Skip was a member of the Delta Protection Commission, served 2 years as a member of the Delta Stewardship Council. The commission thanks Skip for his many years of service to Solano County and the Delta, and presents him with a print that Eric is holding up right now. Skip, I want to just say I've learned a lot from you. Thank you very much for what you've done in your community and in the Delta in particular. I know these are challenging times, but you fought through it. And I know you've always been the voice of reason. You've always brought your full self to the meetings. You've given it your all. And I know that you're certainly going to be missed on this body. But certainly your voice in the Delta has been a huge component of the successes that we've had to date. And so I wanted to just personally say thank you. I've got to know you on a personal level, and you're going to be missed. So I throw it out to other members of the commission if they want to make any comments about Skip's tenure.
Okay, I'll speak up. Oh, Skip, you are so much fun to work with. You have such a great sense of humor and such a deep understanding of what we were working with. Thank you for teaching me, being my friend, and thank you for all of your work that you've done for our community. Thank
you. Oscar, this is Don. Skip, I would just add to what my colleagues have said and what others may say as well, but you certainly have been a tremendous colleague, certainly as a fellow supervisor, but as a member of this commission, and consider you a friend. You know, probably the one and only remaining members of this commission who actually was the original member. I started on in 1995, so you were there right from the beginning, the establishment of the commission, but certainly your work within your framework, your county, but on behalf of the Delta, and we've had many opportunities over the years to work together, and I've appreciated your passion for, not only serving the interests of the county you elected to represent, but certainly the Delta, the people of the Delta, and your work in this realm, but certainly in other realms. And want to wish you, happy, healthy retirement. You and your wife and your family, and thank you for your service. And certainly, when we meet, we'll send a calendar to you so you can tune in, every other month to commission meetings and be one of the members of the public to tell us how we're doing. But all the best and Godspeed to you, Skip. Thanks.
Well, thank you. And I'll end this misery for all of you. So, I don't think it's often that you're able to work at something that is fun every day. And from the day I was elected, I look forward to coming to work and doing the public's business and hopefully making the right choices. Sometimes I was irritating to some of my colleagues, that's putting it mildly. But I've often said that if you're not passionate about what you do, especially in politics, then you're probably in the wrong profession. So I brought everything I could to the issues that I felt passionate about. Lost some, won some, but never shied away from a fight. So, and that's why I alluded to the DWR issue, because DWR and I have had our differences of opinion, but I respect DWR, and and all the folks that I've worked with on their side. And so it's just, I appreciate all the kind words tonight. And I just thank each and every one of you for your passion and what you do. You're a wonderful group of folks, and I wish you all well and protecting the Delta. Thank you.
There may be some others, Skip, but I just wanted to make sure you saw there as your parting gift. There's a print from Gregory Kondos. It's titled Delta Trees, and so we're going to get that to you. But it's a beautiful print, and I think it reflects the work that you've done in the Delta, and you'll enjoy it quite a bit, I think. So,
very good. Well, thank you.
Absolutely. Are there any other?
Mr. Chair, could I just step in and say this print was donated by Monty Van Camp Condos.
Hold it up a little higher, Eric. They can't see it. There we go. There we go.
So Monty donated this. She remembers Skip not only from Delta Leadership Program, but she remembers him from the fight over the Delta Tunnels project. And I especially remember Skip from not even flinching a moment when DWR tried to get him out of that tunnel battle on the Delta Stewardship Council. And so if your supervisor colleagues, the good folks at Shaw Yoder contributed, they're going to get this framed, and I'm going to deliver it to you sometime within the next month and give you my appreciation.
You better hurry.
I know where you live.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. Anybody else?
Yeah, Oscar, this is Chuck.
Yes, sir.
I have to say that when I first met Skip, I was really impressed by his professionalism and certainly his knowledge. But over the years, we've had some great conversations, especially back when we were back in Washington, D.C., on a host of issues other than just water and homelessness and a whole bunch of others. But I think the one thing that I probably will always remember about Skip is that he's an individual that when he walks in the room, it brightens up. I mean, he with his smile, with his personality, with his positiveness, he makes a big difference no matter where he is. And I always appreciated that. And the other aspect that was I thought very impressive, and oftentimes we don't see it, is the ability to just tell it like it is. And although he may say maybe he antagonized people, but I never found him to be mean or vicious or critical. I found him to just tell it like it was, actually. And I think by virtue of that, I think he had a tremendous influence on all of us. And I will certainly miss him and miss his smile and his laugh and certainly his comments. So I wish him the very best. I think you deserve it. And I know you've got plans, but you're one of those individuals we would call in sports a franchise player. No matter what you do or where you go, you will make a difference in that organization. And so again, I wish you the best, and I hopefully you'll keep in contact with us and share what you're doing. But again, nobody's irreplaceable, but you come close. Thanks, Skip.
Thank you.
Yep. Anybody else? Yeah, I think you said it well. Said it well, Chuck. Thank you for that. All right, Skip, that's it. It's your final chance. Thank you so much. And that takes us to item 15, which is motion to adjourn, knowing that January 21st, 2021 will be our next meeting. Hearing no dissenting opinions on that, we stand adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Thank you. See you next year.
Yep.
Thank you, Skip.
Happy holidays.
Thanks, Skip.
Thanks, Skip. Take it easy.
All right.
Thanks, Skip.